I woke up feeling incredibly refreshed today. It's because I'm finally going to see my daughter Nancy and granddaughter Emily after so long. I've got the housewarming gift and treats for Emily all ready to go. In high spirits, my husband Robert and I left the house, arriving at Nancy's new place about half an hour later. It was a beautiful, impressive home with white as the main color scheme. My heart swelled with anticipation at seeing everyone, but Nancy and the others only greeted Robert, not saying a word to me or even making eye contact. Robert handed the housewarming gift to Nancy, gave the treats I prepared to Emily, and walked over to the dining table chatting with them. Then, the three adults besides me sat around the table and started talking cheerfully amongst themselves. I spent some time absent-mindedly watching the three of them. They could clearly see me, so why weren't they trying to talk to me? In that awkward atmosphere, I suddenly sensed a presence in the hallway. Glancing over, I saw Emily beckoning to me from the shadows. Oh, I wasn't forgotten after all, I thought, feeling relieved and happy as I hurried over to her. Emily, you've gotten so big. What is it? Grandma. Emily hesitated, seeming to have trouble getting the words out. After a short pause, she opened her mouth to speak. What? You mean? If my hunch was right. Feeling like I'd had a bucket of cold water dumped on me, I left Emily there and impulsively ran outside. About 10 minutes must have passed since I dashed out of Nancy's house. As I calmed down, I noticed my cell phone was vibrating. I'm sorry. I heard something from Emily and ran out without thinking. Actually, I need to talk to Nancy. The time had finally come to have that conversation. I'm Susan. Recently, something wonderful happened. The day after I turned 52, my colleagues at work threw me a little celebration. On my actual birthday, both Robert and I had the day off. I'd been hoping for something special, but the day passed like any other, leaving me a bit disappointed as I drifted off to sleep. Still feeling a little down, I went to work the next day and was greeted by my coworkers' celebration, filling me with joy for the first time in a while. Look, my coworkers celebrated for me. Wow. That's great. I blurted out to Robert when I got home, still giddy with excitement, but his response lacked any emotion. I couldn't help but wonder if the specialness of birthdays just fades away after decades together. He used to be a bit more caring. Robert and I met through a mutual acquaintance 30 years ago. I was drawn to his understated kindness and friendly demeanor, and we started dating. As time passed, we got married and had a daughter, reaching the pinnacle of happiness. Up until the beginning of our marriage, he remained as kind as when we were dating. But one day, despite our daughter being born, he started coming home late or going out more often, saying it was for work-related socializing. What on earth was he doing and where was he during these work outings? Unable to put up with his frequent absences any longer, I asked Robert about it. You've been going out a lot lately. Where do you always go? Robert quietly opened his mouth to reply. The slot machines. I felt like sighing. It seemed he'd gotten hooked on gambling after starting to go with his coworkers. I know it might be hard to stop going suddenly, so I wish you'd try to cut back little by little. Hoping I could still prevent him from getting too absorbed in gambling, I made the request with my last shred of optimism. Yeah, I'll try my best. I decided to wait and trust that Robert would have a change of heart. A few days after that conversation, Nancy started attending preschool. One day, when I went to take the collection envelope to preschool, I found it was nearly empty. Did I forget to put the money in? I wondered, searching for it, but to no avail. If you don't leave for preschool soon, you'll be late. Seeing that I still wasn't leaving even as departure time drew near, Robert called out to me. Actually, I want to take Nancy to preschool, but the collection envelope I prepared is empty. Where could the money have gone? At that, Robert started to look flustered. Sorry, I was short on cash, so I used some of it yesterday. His sudden confession took me completely by surprise. Why? What did you take money from the collection envelope for? Questions raced through my mind. I was hit with an indescribable feeling, a mix of shock and confusion. For the time being, I put on a calm facade, got Nancy off to preschool, and decided to have a talk with Robert that evening. You didn't have enough money because you spent it on slot machines? How much did you use? Ugh. I'm sorry. With an apologetic look, tears welling up in his eyes, he squeezed out the words. He'd been asked to cut back on his visits to the slot machines, but couldn't stop going. Worse still, the amount of money he was pouring in increased, to the point that he dipped into our living expenses. Robert continued explaining. As he went into more detail, an even more shocking truth came to light. Incredibly, Robert had taken out loans under my name. It was so unbelievable, I had to question if this was really happening. I'll make sure to cut back on the slot machines. I won't cause you any more trouble, Susan, and I'll pay back the loans properly. Robert pleaded, tears glistening in his eyes. Could I trust this man's words? Is it even possible to quickly break free from a gambling addiction? With those thoughts swirling in my head, I decided to end the discussion since talking further wouldn't resolve anything right away. Usually, the three of us sleep together as a family, but I wanted to calm down, so we slept separately. Late at night, as I lay in the bed where Nancy was sleeping, some words flashed through my mind. We might have to divorce. I muttered softly, closing my eyelids. Casually glancing to the side, I saw Nancy's face, looking content in her slumber. If we got divorced, would that mean tearing her dad away from her? To Nancy, he's a kind dad who plays with her a lot. And Nancy is very attached to Robert, too. All right, I'll try believing in him. Thinking that hastily divorcing would be hard on Nancy, I decided to have faith that Robert would change his ways. But it wasn't that simple. Robert dipped into our living expenses time and time again. Each time, we'd discuss it, but then he'd repeat the offense. My frustration with Robert's lack of improvement grew, and some days, I didn't even want to talk to him or see his face. But I didn't want Nancy to see her parents not getting along. Single-mindedly determined not to let Nancy feel any sorrow, I refrained from divorcing Robert no matter how many times he betrayed me. Nancy, blissfully unaware of her parents' issues, grew up cheerfully, and before I knew it, she was 15. Dad, Mom, guess what? I got an A on my last practice test. Taking after who knows which parent, she'd grown into a child with a real knack for studying. Wow, you worked hard. That's amazing. What a relief. My little Nancy, her voice brimming with excitement at dinner time as she talked about her high school entrance exams. Just 2 more months until the actual exams. Around midnight, I happened to pass by Nancy's room and noticed the light was still on. Seems she's studying late into the night. Maybe I should bring her a snack as a break. Nancy, sorry to interrupt your studying. I'm coming in for a sec. Mom, what's up? I brought you some donuts since you're working so hard. Wow. Perfect timing. I was just thinking I wanted to take a break. Nancy happily munched on the donut. She was studying so diligently every day, I started to worry she might be overdoing it. I was really impressed by how she steadily put in the effort day by day to get into her target high school. Oh, that reminds me. Dad gave me this the other day. What Nancy cheerfully showed me was a lucky charm for passing her exams. Dad can be really sweet about these things, huh? Robert always supported the decisions Nancy made, cheering her on and giving her thoughtful little gifts. But in reality, even as Nancy grew up, Robert continued to take out loans and come crying to me each time, his attitude never changing. Nancy had no idea Robert was a gambling addict, firmly believing he was a good dad. Then, the high school entrance exams ended, and Nancy managed to get into the school she wanted. Nancy, that's wonderful. It's all thanks to your and Dad's support. Maybe Dad's lucky charm did the trick. Thank you both. Even if the image Robert showed to Nancy was a false one, as long as she was happy, that was enough. Seeing Nancy's blissful face, I felt I'd made the right choice in not divorcing him after all. And so, Nancy enjoyed her high school days before leaving our hometown to attend a university in Boston. Are you really going to Boston? I'd always thought she'd stay close by, so it was incredibly hard to be separated from her. But I didn't want to limit Nancy's options in life because of my own selfish feelings. I wanted Nancy to freely walk down the path she'd chosen for herself. With those mixed feelings swirling inside me, I accepted her decision to go to Boston. Mom, don't worry, I'll come back to visit sometimes. Perhaps sensing my loneliness, Nancy reassured me with those words. And then, the day of Nancy's departure finally arrived. Robert and I saw Nancy off at the airport together. Dad, Mom, you two keep living happily together, okay? With those bright parting words, she headed towards the gate, occasionally glancing back to wave at us. After Nancy left, I silently made my way home, immersed in my loneliness. A life with just the two of us, huh? Robert would probably dive right back into gambling without learning his lesson. I let out a small sigh at the thought. My prediction was spot on. When Nancy was still living with us, he'd go for short stints to avoid arousing her suspicion, but now I was the only one at home. As if to relax, Robert spent all his time at the slot machines, whether it was after work or on his days off. I thought things would be okay as long as we could secure the bare minimum living expenses, so I didn't say anything to Robert and simply went about my days. Deep down, there's no point in saying anything. It won't change. I'm tired of trying to make him quit. I may have given up. As we continued living like that, Nancy graduated from university and ended up getting a job over there. I guess she won't be coming back here anymore. I'd held out a little hope that she might return to our hometown after graduating, but my wish wasn't so easily granted. A few years later, some happy news arrived from Nancy. Mom, I got proposed to. What? Really? Congratulations. What's he like? His name is Thomas, and he's super kind, just like Dad. And you know what? Nancy chattered on about trivial things like what furniture to get for their new home and which houseplants to choose. The words kind like Dad stuck with me, but hearing Nancy's cheerful voice overflowing with energy, I swallowed back the story that had almost spilled from my lips. I really should have told Nancy about Robert. But if she found out that the dad she'd always thought was kind was actually a gambling addict drowning in debt, it would surely break her heart. It was enough for me to bear the sorrow and pain alone. Telling myself that, I let the chance to confess slip away. A year later, even more joyous news came flying in. Nancy had given birth to a child. Watching the video, I saw an adorable baby, so tiny it seemed like it might break at the slightest touch, yet crying out with a powerful voice. Our very first grandchild. I wanted to go see the baby right away, but it wasn't a distance I could easily visit. The child was named Emily, and since I couldn't go meet her, Nancy would send me photos and occasionally video call me instead. Each time I heard from Nancy, I could sense Emily growing up healthily and steadily into a cute little girl. When Robert was home during video calls with Emily, I'd call him over to join the conversation, and when photos of Emily arrived, we'd look at them together. My frustration with Robert hadn't been resolved, and after it became just the two of us living together, we could only manage the bare minimum of conversation, but when talking about Emily, we were able to chat naturally like a normal couple. Emily's existence was my salvation. However, little by little, the frequency of Nancy's contact decreased. She must have returned to work and was struggling to balance that with childcare. I reminisced about the past, thinking, I had a period like that too. Back then, no matter what I was doing, I was so busy and it was tough. When she is going through turbulent times with work and parenting, getting contacted more than necessary must be unsettling. I held back on reaching out to Nancy myself, hoping she'd contact me once her life settled down and she had more breathing room. Then, around the time Emily turned 5, Robert, who had unusually come home in time for dinner, said this. Nancy's family is moving to the next town over, apparently. Seems like Thomas got transferred or something. Really? They contacted you? Yeah, I was busy so I only heard the brief version though. Something that important, they could have contacted me directly. Feeling a little miffed in my heart that they hadn't reached out to me, I was still overjoyed that Nancy would be moving nearby. I'll try giving Nancy a quick call next time I have a day off. I can't wait for my next break. With those thoughts swirling in my head, I was somehow able to sleep soundly that night. Then, when my day off came, I opened up my cell phone to contact Nancy. About to make the call, a casual thought popped into my mind. I don't know what she's up to right now, so I'll just try messaging her for the time being. Nancy, how are you doing? Are Thomas and Emily doing well too? I heard from Dad that you're moving to the next town over, is that true? Fill me in on the details next time you have a chance. After sending the message, I was restless wondering when I'd get a reply, but even after noon passed, there was still no response. That night, I finally got a response from Nancy. Sorry, I've been busy. Our house in the next town will be finished at the end of May. We plan to move in June. I see. Let me know once you've settled on a moving date. Nancy's curt message conveyed just how busy she was. I wanted to keep in touch more, but I ended our message exchange so as not to bother her. A few months later, the day arrived for Nancy and her family to move. I was looking forward to seeing Nancy and Emily for the first time in a while. I woke up feeling unusually refreshed and found myself humming while getting ready. I've got the housewarming gift and the treats for Emily too. All set. Are you ready to go? Yeah, I'm good. Let's head out. Robert and I set off together for Nancy's housewarming party. After a few dozen minutes, we arrived at Nancy's new home. It was a gorgeous, impressive house with white as the predominant color. My heart swelled with anticipation, wondering how much Emily had grown as I entered the house. Hey there, Thomas. What a marvelous home you've built. Robert, long time no see. Please, come on in. Dad, welcome. Come in, come in. Yay! You're finally here. The moment they spotted Robert, the three of them rushed over to usher him inside. As Robert forged ahead, I quietly followed behind. Still, it seemed like all three of them only greeted Robert, without saying a word to me or even making eye contact. Deciding I must be imagining things, I took a seat on the living room sofa. Here's the housewarming gift. And some sweets for Emily. Wow, thanks for going out of your way, Dad. Did you pick these out? No, Susan chose them. I see. Oh, Dad. You like this wine, right? Thomas likes it too, he says. With that, they headed over to the dining table, where the three adults excluding me sat around chatting cheerfully. I spent some time absent-mindedly watching the three of them. It wasn't my imagination that they weren't speaking to me or meeting my gaze. It's not like they couldn't see me, so why weren't Nancy and Thomas trying to talk to me? Could it be that I'd done something to cause this? Even Emily, who I'd video called with so much, wouldn't come near me. Maybe she'd forgotten my face since it had been a while since our last video call. I sat on the sofa, questions swirling in my mind about Nancy and Thomas's behavior. In that uncomfortable atmosphere, I absent-mindedly sensed a presence in the hallway. Glancing over, I saw Emily beckoning to me from the shadows. Emily was going to talk to me. Feeling relieved and happy that she hadn't forgotten me, I hurried over to her with quick steps. Emily, you've gotten so big. What's up? Do you have something to tell Grandma? Grandma. Emily hesitated, seeming to have trouble getting the words out. The next moment, the words that spilled from Emily's mouth were beyond anything I could have imagined. I want you to stop taking money from Mommy and Daddy. Shocked, I asked her to repeat herself. What? I'm taking money from your parents? I was completely baffled by this sudden accusation that I had no recollection of. When had I ever taken money from Nancy and her family? And why would Emily, at just 5 years old, be telling me this? I'm sorry, Grandma doesn't really understand this talk about money. Did your parents say something? I gently asked, trying to get some information on why Emily had brought this up. I overheard Mommy and Daddy talking. They said because Grandma takes money, Mommy and Daddy are in a lot of trouble. They said they can't give you money anymore. Don't cause trouble for Mommy and Daddy. Emily pleaded with me, her eyes welling up with sadness. Seeing Emily's sorrowful face, I instinctively patted her head. As I stroked Emily's hair, I came to my senses. Could it be? I had an unsettling premonition. For the past year or two, Robert had stopped mentioning money to me. I hadn't paid it much mind, assuming his gambling luck had simply been good lately. If my hunch was right. Feeling like I'd had a bucket of cold water dumped on me, I left Emily there and impulsively ran outside. After running for a bit until I was out of breath, I sent Robert a message. Then I hurriedly headed to a nearby spot. About 10 minutes must have passed since I dashed out of Nancy's house. As I calmed down, I noticed my cell phone was vibrating. However, before I could pick it up, the vibration stopped. Looking at the screen, I saw several missed calls from Nancy. For the time being, I called Nancy back to apologize for leaving her house without a word. I'm sorry for suddenly disappearing without saying goodbye.
That's okay, but after I noticed you were gone, Dad abruptly left too. What's going on with you two?
Nancy sounded perplexed. I'm sorry. I heard something from Emily and ran out without thinking. Actually, I need to talk to you, Nancy. The time had finally come to have that conversation. I had no recollection of what Emily had said. It was almost certainly Robert's doing. Robert must have been borrowing money from Nancy and her family without telling me. At this rate, Robert would surely keep demanding money from them over and over. Desperately wanting to somehow prevent Nancy from going through the same painful experiences as me, I finally resolved to come clean. I know you love your dad very much, Nancy. But your mom, well, I've been constantly troubled by your dad. Yeah. Even before you were born, your dad got hooked on gambling. He couldn't break free from his addiction, and at its worst, he'd dip into our living expenses.
What? Really?
Nancy seemed shocked by this side of Robert she hadn't known. But that's not all. He's taken out a lot of loans under my name. I'm still steadily paying them back, but your dad hasn't changed, so the repayments are far from over.
Wait a minute, something doesn't add up. Isn't it that you're the one in debt and struggling?
Did Nancy think I was the one with the loans?
Dad came to me about 2 years ago, asking to borrow money. Even when I asked what he needed it for, he wouldn't give a clear answer and just said you were in trouble. It wasn't a huge amount, so I lent it to him as is. But this past year, he's been contacting me a lot, and even when I told him to let me talk to you, Dad wouldn't put you on.
According to Nancy, Robert had been contacting her and Thomas, saying I had borrowed money and didn't have the means to pay it back, so he needed a loan. And it wasn't just once or twice. Moreover, Robert had apparently said this to prevent them from contacting me directly. Your mom is a bit messed up right now because of the debt, so don't reach out to her. We don't want her mental state to get any worse, so it's best not to agitate her too much. Hearing that from Nancy, I'd finally reached my limit. What was he thinking, going so far as to borrow money from our daughter and her family?
I'm so sorry for all the trouble your dad has caused. And I'm sorry, too, for keeping quiet about your dad to you, Nancy.
I regretted not telling Nancy about Robert's behavior until now. Because of my silence, I couldn't even fathom how much hardship I'd put Nancy and Thomas through. Thinking back on all the missed chances, wishing I'd spoken up back then, I was overwhelmed with remorse. You were so fond of your dad and really close to him. I thought I couldn't take your dad away from you, so I've kept it hidden all this time. I wanted to be good parents in front of you, to be a happy family. Nancy listened in silence for a while as I spoke through my tears. Then, after a short pause, she said in a trembling voice,
If you were struggling so much, I wish you'd told me at the time. Did you not rely on me even when I was older, when I became an adult? No matter what, my love for you and Dad will never change, and because we're family, we can talk about anything, can't we?
Nancy's words brought an endless stream of tears. So, do you know why Dad rushed out in such a hurry earlier? That's right. I had completely forgotten about Robert.
After I heard the story from Emily, my anger towards your dad exploded and I went to City Hall. I got the divorce application forms. I can't take it anymore, so I'm divorcing him. That's what I messaged him. Then, he must have seen the message on his phone and panicked. Dad was in such a rush, he left the front door wide open when he took off. Thanks to that, he didn't even get to drink his favorite booze. Well, it's his own fault though,
Nancy said with a laugh. Nancy, I'm divorcing your dad. Yeah, thank you for hanging in there all this time. And I'm sorry too, for believing what Dad said and treating you so coldly. Can you forgive me? Of course. It was quite a shock to be ignored like that. I'm glad we're talking again. And so, Nancy and I reconciled and were able to talk like we used to. It seems Nancy told Thomas about all this too. Later on, I got an apologetic call from Thomas as well. Susan, I'm so sorry for my rude behavior the other day. Nancy told me everything. No, don't worry about it. If anything, I should be apologizing for all the trouble Robert has caused you. I'll make sure he pays you back properly.
By the way, I have a friend who's well-versed in divorce cases. Would it be all right if I introduced you?
I was able to make amends with Thomas too, and he even offered to help with the divorce preparations. Since it would be difficult for me to live under the same roof as Robert until the divorce was finalized, I decided to rent an apartment and live alone to avoid seeing him. The preparations for the divorce proceeded smoothly on my end, until all that was left was to file for the divorce trial. The person Thomas introduced me to was extremely competent, advising me to properly claim compensation in the divorce settlement, including reparations for everything up until now. Without hesitation, I went through the procedures to request compensation in the divorce trial. Getting money won't change the past, but it's better than nothing and might make me feel a bit lighter.
Hello, Robert? I'm all set for the divorce, but what about you? I'm really sorry for everything, Susan. Won't you please reconsider? I won't go to the slot machines anymore, and I'll pay back the money I owe Nancy and them properly, so won't you come back home for now? I won't do it again. I won't go anymore. I've heard those same lines so many times. Do you have any idea how much it hurts me to have believed your words and been betrayed over and over?
Remembering all the times I'd been betrayed in the past, my chest tightened with pain. Even after the divorce trial began, Robert kept complaining without remorse, but after multiple court sessions, the divorce was finally granted. The money Robert had borrowed under my name was also legally arranged to be repaid by him, allowing me to break free from the burden of debt at last. As for the money he'd borrowed from Nancy and her family, legal procedures were put in place to ensure Robert would pay it back properly too. After the divorce was finalized, Robert continued living alone in the house we'd originally shared. However, gambling addiction is truly a frightening thing. Even after all this, Robert couldn't quit gambling. Unable to borrow money or turn to anyone for help, a desperate Robert apparently ended up dipping into company funds. Now, he's living quietly in a town far from our hometown. They say he's working diligently to pay off the compensation from the divorce trial and his debts. Sometime later, I went to visit Nancy's house one day. As we were having lunch together, chatting about trivial things, the topic suddenly changed.
Hey, Mom. Thomas and I were thinking, why don't you come live with us in this house?
I was surprised by the unexpected offer, and at the same time, joy welled up inside me. But I had already caused Nancy and her family so much trouble. And yet, I couldn't possibly impose on them any further. I'm very happy, but I'll just accept your feelings. The moment I replied, Emily's energetic voice rang out.
We get to live with Grandma? Yay! Grandma, you'll be with me forever. I'm so happy.
Seeing Emily's delighted expression and how overjoyed she was, I started to feel guilty about refusing. Is it really okay for me to depend on you all like this?
Of course. Emily's thrilled, and Thomas and I are happy too. Plus, it'd be reassuring to have you live with us.
And so, it was decided that I would live together with Nancy and her family. Since Nancy and Thomas both wanted to focus on their careers, I spent my days doing housework and looking after Emily to support them. Thanks to that, every day felt truly fulfilling. Even while enjoying such happy days, I sometimes find myself thinking, if I had trusted Nancy, who was still a student at the time, and told her about Robert during my most painful period, I wonder what the outcome would have been. If I had confessed everything when Nancy got married, would a different future have awaited us? Still, by finding the courage at the very end, I'm able to spend incomparably happier days than ever before.
Grandma, I'm home. Listen. Today, my teacher.
As I watched Emily cheerfully sharing about her day with a radiant smile, I wished for this happiness to continue forever.
You must be Kevin?
I hadn't seen my grandson Kevin since he was in elementary school, but I was certain it was him. He should be a freshman in high school this year, so the age fits. However, I didn't recognize the child he was carrying on his back. Hi, Grandma, it's been a while. Tears distorted my vision. I didn't know what to say, moved by the painful sight and the joy of reunion. Grown up now, he was, unlike me, never one to wear his emotions on his sleeve. Please, can you let us stay for the night? I didn't know what had happened, but there must be a reason they were out in this snowy weather, thinly dressed and at this place. The effort it took to come this distance in the snow, carrying a child, must have been immense. The child on his back was shivering. Their limbs were red and black from the cold, lips turning a shade of blue-purple. Kevin's legs were shaking, barely able to hold the child on his back any longer. I was about to nod, as if to say of course.
Don't be ridiculous. I won't take care of that kid.
My husband, Brian, who was supposed to be watching TV in the back of the house, came stomping to the entrance. He must have heard our conversation. Even I flinched at his presence, so a high schooler like him must be terrified. However, I see, he said with a smile. A hollow smile that twisted just his lips. It was as if he had expected this all along. My name is Abigail. I live a leisurely life in the countryside, a bit away from the city center. Now in my late 60s, Brian has retired, and we live on our pensions. Brian has always been incredibly stubborn and difficult. When he was working, he often clashed with others and seemed to be in constant trouble. But those who knew him well understood that Brian was just clumsy. He hated dishonesty and was hard to sway once he made up his mind. And he was terribly bad at expressing his feelings. Back then, I knew that Brian was more stubborn and clumsy than others, so I sometimes stepped in to help. I wasn't as capable at work as he was, but I was better at socializing. In a sense, we were opposites, but we naturally got along. We supported each other, eventually started dating, and got married. After getting married, we were blessed with our son, Matthew, right away. Brian, stubborn as he was, seemed to pour his kind of love into him. Thanks to that, Matthew grew up well, got married, and was blessed with Kevin. It seemed like our happiness would continue forever, but it didn't turn out that way. We've grown distant from Matthew for several years now. A huge fight between Brian and Matthew was the start of the rift. Even I, who usually stayed neutral, ended up taking Brian's side, so much so that I haven't seen him for years. And because of that, I haven't seen Kevin in a long time as well. It's been lonely not seeing my dear grandson, but it seems there's nothing I can do. It all started with Matthew's marriage. Matthew married a woman he had been dating since his student days, Isabella. Isabella lived nearby, and our families got along well, so Brian and I wholeheartedly celebrated their marriage. I remember when Kevin was born, Brian lifted him up with a beaming face, as if he was a different person. It was around the time Kevin entered elementary school that Isabella started coming to me with concerns. Matthew comes home late, and there are too many overtimes and weekend shifts. I tell him not to push himself too hard. I was touched by Isabella's genuine concern for him. Having a small child, his overtimes and weekend work must have been a significant stress. Brian was also a workaholic and had a tough time, so I could understand her feelings all too well. I also reached out to Matthew a few times, equally worried. Working too hard could break him. And if the company was that bad, it might be worth reporting to the appropriate authorities. That's what I advised. Before I could finish, Matthew let out an exaggerated sigh.
It's different from Dad and Mom's time. Don't butt in. I'm doing what I want to do.
And yelled. From his tone, I realized the company wasn't forcing the overtime or weekend work on him. What had suddenly happened? As a child, he used to complain about his dad always being busy with work. He wasn't particularly devoted to his job. It seemed like he viewed it merely as a means to earn money and live. Isabella must have been well aware of this, which is probably why she confided in me. My worry turned into suspicion from that day on. Sure enough, my sense of unease grew over time. Not long after, I received shocking news.
What? Isabella has passed away.
Tears filled the call from Isabella's parents. She had been hit by a truck while walking along a national highway. She was walking in a place without sidewalks at night, and the truck driver apparently didn't see her. Isabella was a serious and calm person, someone who wouldn't recklessly cross a national highway. At least, the her I knew wasn't that kind of person. Later, I heard that she had been acting distracted before the accident. Her parents occasionally received frantic calls from her. The content of those calls made my blood run cold. She said Matthew was having an affair. She knew the other woman was Madison, a clerk at his workplace. Why she was in a dangerous place where the accident occurred remains unclear. However, Isabella's parents believe that the shock of Matthew's affair led her to a nervous breakdown. I remained in shock for a while after the call ended. After receiving a message from Brian that he was on his way to the hospital, I finally snapped back to reality. By the time I arrived, Brian, who had left work early, was already at the hospital. Only Isabella's parents and Kevin, being held by them, were there. Apparently, the news of the accident was first sent to Matthew, but there was no response. Then it reached her parents, and finally, he was contacted at the very end. Despite his company being much closer to the hospital than our house, he was the last to arrive. And he didn't seem to be in any rush or showing signs of panic.
What the hell are you doing?
Brian, having heard about Matthew's demeanor and his affair, furiously confronted him. I had never seen Brian so angry. Yet, Matthew was defiant.
I did have an affair. But what happened to her was an accident, right? It's not my fault. The affair was her fault, not mine.
He blamed the root cause on Isabella not paying attention to him after Kevin was born. Once a child is born, parenting becomes the priority. However, for Matthew, who had always been the center of attention in the family, it was unacceptable that someone else was prioritized, even if it was his own son. Thus, he couldn't prioritize a lifestyle that favored Kevin, leading to Kevin not being very attached to him. This vicious cycle resulted in feeling out of place in his own home. He yelled in front of the late Isabella that her nervous breakdown was her own fault. Her parents broke down crying at his irresponsible words, and Brian was a step away from hitting Matthew. I could only try to calm Kevin, who started crying harder at the sight of the adults' argument. At that moment, I felt so helpless, watching the situation and not being able to do anything. This was how a decisive rift formed between us and him. Kevin pleaded for Isabella's parents or us to take him in, but Matthew refused. Though he confessed to the affair at the hospital, there was no further evidence, and no one had recorded the confession, so his affair wasn't proven. I was extremely worried about his selfish behavior. So, hoping it might help, I gave Kevin a map and contact information to our house. It was a bit of a walk from their house to ours, but it was better than nothing. If nothing else, that would be fine. And so, we parted ways. Later, I heard rumors that he had remarried to that Madison. I heard she is about 10 years younger than Matthew. There were rumors they were dating even though she knew he was married at the time. I was worried about Kevin. I had visited Matthew's house alone a few times, but it was always dark, and no one answered the doorbell. After several attempts, I gave up to avoid being reported as a suspicious person. It's been years since I last saw Kevin. Those memories keep coming back, even as life goes on. Even now, drinking warm cocoa, I think of him. He used to enjoy the cocoa I made. I wonder how he's grown, how he's doing, and if his family situation is okay. But all I can do is worry. I sip from my mug, looking outside. A cold wave has hit our area today, turning everything outside the window white. The surroundings are enveloped in night and terribly cold. I'll likely need to shovel snow tomorrow. You know, we might need to shovel snow tomorrow morning. I was about to discuss tomorrow's shoveling with Brian, who was watching TV, when the doorbell rang. Brian and I look at each other. We don't know anyone who would visit us on a snowy night like this. With a bit of fear, we open the sliding door to find a high school-aged boy standing there, carrying a small child on his back. His appearance catches my attention. The boy wears a slightly wrinkled white shirt under a school jacket and worn-out sweatpants. The small child is in a t-shirt, a thin hoodie likely for autumn, and shorts. Both have red limbs and a little snow piled on their heads and shoulders. Long footprints lead from the pure white garden to the road. It seems they walked here in this attire. As I realized this and looked at the boy's face, I was surprised.
You must be Kevin?
I hadn't seen Kevin since he was in elementary school, but I was certain. The corners of his eyes droop like Isabella's, and his nose is just like Matthew's. He should be a freshman in high school this year, so the age fits. However, I didn't recognize the child Kevin was carrying. Grandma, long time no see. Indeed, the high school-aged boy was Kevin. Tears distorted my vision. I didn't know what to say, moved by the painful sight and the joy of reunion. Grown up now, he was, unlike me, never one to wear his emotions on his sleeve. Please, can you let us stay for the night? I didn't know what had happened, but there must be a reason they were out in this snowy weather, thinly dressed and at this place. They must have come here relying solely on the address I gave him when he was young. The effort it took to come this distance in the snow, carrying a child, must have been immense. I was about to nod, as if to say of course.
Don't be ridiculous. I won't take care of that kid.
The one who came stomping to the entrance was Brian, who was supposed to be watching TV in the back of the house. It seems he heard our conversation. Even I froze at his angrily raised voice. Long having been together, if I'm taken aback, Kevin, a high schooler, must be terrified. Worried, I looked at Kevin and the child. But Kevin, unfazed by Brian's demeanor, muttered quietly, looking down. I see, he said, smiling. It was a hollow smile that twisted just his lips. It was as if he had expected this all along. Anger rose in me at Brian for causing Kevin to make such an expression. No matter how stubborn or unforgiving, what kind of attitude is this towards an innocent, beloved grandson? Just as I was about to speak up, I'm cold. The child on his back shivered. His limbs had turned even redder, his lips more purple. Kevin's legs were shaking, no longer able to carry the child on his back. Brian glared at the child on the back.
We need to get to a hospital first. If you're not going, I'll take the car out. Oh.
Brian, wide-eyed, silently grabbed the car keys and hurried to the garage. I knew he could be hard to understand, but in his way, Brian was worried about Kevin and the child. Can't take care of that child, huh? Always short on words. It meant the child was in too dire a state to be cared for at home. Right, that's the kind of man he is. I hadn't realized until now, but there was a hint of panic in Brian's actions. I followed his words and urged Kevin to the garage. You've done well to make it this far. We're going to the hospital, so you can relax now. Let me carry the child.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Kevin's face showed surprise, then confusion, as if trying to make sense of the situation. During this time, he readjusted the child on his back and, prompted, began walking towards the garage. It seems Kevin grew up to have a strong sense of responsibility. He always worries about the kids, putting himself last. Even though he's shivering with terrible frostbite. It was my role in the car to reassure him that everything would be okay. Afterwards, we managed to find a hospital open at night, and Kevin and the little one were able to see a doctor right away. When asking the doctor about their condition, they were diagnosed with frostbite and malnutrition. Fortunately, because we got them to the hospital immediately, there was no danger to their lives. I felt relieved. While he was being treated in the warm hospital, Brian was not his usual self. He was visibly worried, asking the doctor detailed questions about their condition and holding their hands to ease their anxiety. I wondered where his usual grumpy face had gone as I glanced at him, waiting for him to recover. Hours later, after receiving 4 fluids, Kevin were able to join us on our way home before dawn. In the car back, I asked him one question. It was about the little one he had been carrying. He had filled out the hospital paperwork, writing the child's name as Robert, aged 5. As expected, his response was as I thought. Robert was his half-brother with a different mother. In other words, another grandson for Brian and me. Cautiously, I asked about how they had been living at home up to now. Their attire, light despite it being winter, said it all, but I had to ask. Sure enough, Kevin revealed that he had been treated coldly by his stepmother, Madison, because he was from his father's previous marriage. He was always verbally abused and discriminated against in daily life, including meals. He couldn't even get new clothes. The school uniform he wore was the warmest clothing he had. Matthew, who should have been his real father, showed no interest in him. He essentially ignored whatever Madison did to him. Robert, the child of Matthew and Madison, was cherished as a baby by both. But as they gradually stopped caring, it became a nuisance, huh? They started to push Robert's care onto him. They always put themselves first, unable to prioritize their children. Luckily, he adored his much younger brother Robert. He had been taking care of him since he was in middle school. Just thinking about how Kevin had his own needs during adolescence, yet had to care for Robert, was heart-wrenching. Despite his inexperience, Kevin's dedication was evident in how close Robert felt to him. Robert, not used to being in a car driven by someone unfamiliar, was tense and didn't speak a word. He clung to Kevin, not wanting to be away from him, a clear testament to their bond. Finally, I asked why they had come to our home in the dead of winter, a journey difficult to make on foot. He was initially reluctant to speak. Yet, sensing my concern, he gradually opened up about their situation. Unbelievably, Madison and Matthew had left the children behind to go on a trip far away. They left hardly any food or money at home, so their supplies quickly ran out. Being winter break probably added to their desperation. Without food, Kevin and the young Robert would starve. With no school open and not wanting to impose on friends, Kevin felt he had no one to turn to. So, with a sense of desperation, he decided to make the journey to our home, tears in his eyes as he spoke.
Why didn't you contact us before?
Brian yelled at him with a stern voice while driving. The guilt of not reaching out to Kevin sooner and allowing Matthew's tyranny. plus the helplessness of not having been turned to for help before, was palpable to me. Understanding Brian takes time and effort. You really shouldn't say it like that. We're so happy that Kevin and Robert turned to us in the end. To Kevin and Robert, who had little interaction with him, Brian might just seem like a scary grandfather. Worried they might be frightened, I spoke up, but their faces showed no fear. Perhaps my deep concern for Kevin and Robert in the hospital had reached them. I've wanted to contact you many times before, but I was worried about what Mom had told me, and I couldn't find the courage to reach out. He awkwardly began to explain why he hadn't relied on us until now. After Matthew remarried, Madison yelled at him repeatedly.
You're not loved by your grandparents. Kids like you are a nuisance everywhere, so don't even think about relying on them.
At first, I thought it was a lie. The grandparents I remembered were always kind. But after being told repeatedly, he started to believe it was true. I have memories of being loved as a child, and I couldn't believe that grandparents who had been so good to me would hate me. Now, I can think that way. Yet, until recently, he had whispered that he felt unloved for some reason. Madison must have manipulated him into not seeking help from me or Brian.
So that's why you smiled when he yelled.
Kevin nodded. When Brian yelled at the entrance, Kevin had smiled, feeling empty, as if Madison's words had been proven right. Hearing this, Brian seemed even more regretful, his eyebrows furrowed.
But you both protected us.
Kevin said he finally felt at ease and cried. Perhaps triggered by his older brother's tears, or maybe because his tension was relieved, Robert also started crying. Upon arriving at our home, they immediately went to the bed we had prepared. It's warm, Kevin. Saying this, Robert rubbed his cheek against the blanket and fell asleep embraced by Kevin. Feeling both a sense of affection and sorrow, tears rolled down my cheeks. Their behavior suggested that they rarely had the chance to sleep in a warm, comfortable bed. Brian and I wanted to keep watching Kevin and Robert's sleeping faces forever, but we couldn't. We had a lot to do. In the morning, Brian took the car out again. He had the medical reports from the hospital and was going to file a complaint against Matthew and Madison. We prepared while waiting for them to return. Weeks later, when they returned from their trip and arrived at their home, the police were waiting and arrested them. Initially, Matthew accused me and Brian of kidnapping. He continued to assert this even when confronted with evidence. Brian and I feel responsible for how selfishly and terribly our son turned out. The last time we saw Matthew in court, his face had become even more severe than when we last parted. What went wrong? Did we make a mistake in how we raised him? Or was there some significant turning point in Matthew's adulthood? It might be too late to ponder these questions now, but seeing Matthew continue to hurl terrible words in court made me realize we've reached a point of no return. Now, we must focus solely on protecting Kevin and Robert, who have been deeply hurt. Brian and I discussed and decided to wholeheartedly support Kevin and his brother. Eventually, the two were arrested for neglecting their guardianship duties. The diagnoses of malnutrition, among other things, served as decisive evidence. The statements from me, Brian, and the boys likely helped support this decision. Suddenly, Kevin and Robert were left alone. With their parents arrested and nowhere to go, they wanted to come to our house. But I think we, who raised Matthew to abandon his parenting responsibilities, are not qualified to raise them. So, we also consulted Isabella's parents. They were relieved to hear Kevin was safe and were concerned for Robert, a child who should be a stranger to them. We'd like to take both of them in if we could. But sadly, it might be difficult to adopt Robert since they're not related by blood. And separating the brothers would be too cruel. That's why they said our home, where the brothers can stay together, is the best option. They also promised to support each other going forward. How kind are these people, to offer such gentle words to the parents of Matthew, who did terrible things to their daughter. Lately, I find myself tearing up easily. And so, it was decided that my husband and I would take in Kevin and Robert. When I took Kevin and Robert's hands and said,
"From now on, you'll live with us,"
they showed us bright smiles. Still, they were quite reserved when they first moved in. But soon, we all warmed up to each other. He is always eager to help out. This year, we've had a lot of snow, but he's been forward in offering to help shovel it. Young Robert, trying to imitate what he sees, grabs a shovel and heads outside too. It seems he's at that age where he wants to mimic everything his brother does. Brian, watching the two, would complain but also teach them the tricks of shoveling snow. It seems he's quite pleased to be relied upon by the adorable Kevin and Robert.
"You can't even do this? Honestly, you guys are hopeless,"
Brian would say with a straight face, his usual grumbling. However, Kevin and Robert seem to know it's just his way of hiding his embarrassment and take it in stride. "We'll be better than Grandpa in no time, right, big brother?"
"That's right, maybe even by tomorrow."
Brian, as grumpy as ever, is becoming fondly attached to Kevin and Robert, including his difficult demeanor. Watching their heartwarming interactions, I'm busy preparing today's meal.
"Everyone, dinner's ready. Let's take a break."
Calling out loudly, the three of them walk over, laughing and smiling together. What a blissful everyday life we have. Winter is almost over, and the season of budding flowers is approaching. Between the four of us, warm times are passing by.
"Call an ambulance, quick. How can you be so oblivious?"
Suddenly, Brittany, who lives next door, rushed into my apartment in a panic. It all started when Tony collapsed in the bathroom. Lately, Tony never parts with his mobile phone, no matter where he is in the house. In fact, he even takes it to the bathroom, apparently talking to someone. Why she, living next door, knew in real time that he had collapsed in the bathroom is beyond me. Honestly, there's no reason for her to call me oblivious. I already know why she is connected to him, and how she knew immediately about his collapse in the bathroom. They might think it's a secret, but there have been many suspicious moments in the past. It's funny they don't realize that they're the only ones who don't notice. I've turned a blind eye until now, but I've decided to put a stop to it. They've been having their way, thinking I've been silently watching. Of course, I plan to retaliate against Tony, but I also want Brittany to suffer just like me. They shouldn't think they can get away with this. It's time for them to pay for 13 years of betrayal. I'm Rosetta, a 40-year-old housewife. I met my husband Tony through a mutual acquaintance. At my age, I long to marry and build a warm home. A friend suggested I meet Tony, saying it wouldn't hurt just to meet. I was all work and no play, with no chances to meet anyone. Watching my friends get married, I wondered what life with someone I loved would be like. Thinking it was just a meeting, I said yes, only to find an unexpectedly great connection. Our hobbies and topics of conversation matched, and our conversational pace and rhythm felt incredibly comfortable. It was as if we had met before, and I wanted to see him again. I had dated a few men before, but none with whom I could talk so freely. My first impression of Tony was of a caring man, always putting me first. I quickly fell for his ever-present kindness. "Rosetta, I thought this would suit you."
"What's this? It's not my birthday or our anniversary. Can I open it?"
"Please do." Inside the box he handed me was a beautiful lemon yellow dress.
"It's lovely. I've never worn a dress like this. I wonder if it suits me." "It's definitely going to suit you, Rosetta. I want to see you in it here."
"Here?" I'm a bit nervous. I quickly tried on the dress.
"Yeah. The size is just right. It suits you as I thought. I'm happy. Thank you."
He nodded with satisfaction as he looked at me. Though kind to me, I sometimes caught a glimpse of his stern side. It was mostly during work-related calls. Even on dates, he'd occasionally receive calls and issue instructions. I'd find myself admiring his commanding presence. He, a manager, seemed to be always busy, even on his days off. It must be tough getting work calls even on your day off. Well, it's not too bad. But it can be tough dealing with incompetent subordinates. Oh, we should head out. Our restaurant reservation is coming up. Laughing, we hand in hand hurried to the restaurant we had reserved. I wanted to marry a wonderful woman like you. Will you marry me? If it's with you, I'd be happy to. Please take care of me from now on. I felt happy to be able to marry him. But this happiness, I soon realized, was fleeting. I intended to continue working as a nurse even after getting married. But things seemed to be heading in a bad direction. About the housework. I plan to continue working, even though we're married. Is it okay to ask you to help when I have night shifts? His expression then turned grim. You intend to continue working? Yes, is that a problem? It's a bit, not right for a woman to keep working after marriage. Nowadays, it's not uncommon for couples to be dual income. In reality, there are more households around me where both partners are working hard as dual income couples than those with just a housewife. Even after hearing my reasoning, he insisted I should quit working after marriage, so I asked him why. I thought there must be some reason from his perspective. Believing it's important for spouses to understand and compromise with each other, I decided to ask. Ever since college days, I've been coming back to a dark room and turning on the light alone. Tony, you've lived alone for a long time since college, right? The moment the room lights up and I realize I'm alone, I just hate that feeling. His expression seemed to darken for a moment. So that's how you felt. I lived with my family for a long time, but I guess living alone can make you feel that way. That's why I want you, Rosetta, to quit your full-time job. Of course, I'll work in your place. There's even talk of me becoming a director soon. Really? A promotion at this time? That's amazing. Then, scratching the tip of his nose awkwardly, he replied. Whenever he feels shy about something, he fiddles with his nose and breathes heavily. He looked at me as if expecting more praise, so he must have been really happy. He always prioritized career advancement, working hard to be recognized at work, so this honor must mean a lot to him. It's not a big deal for someone like me. But there are only a few among my peers who have become managers, so I guess my progress is relatively fast. Proudly saying this, I felt a hesitation beside him. Sensing my indecision, he leaned in and said, You're not going to cling to your job when I, your husband, am asking you this humbly, right? I was speechless at his expression, one I had never seen before. It was unbelievable, and instinctively, I felt I shouldn't meet his eyes anymore, a strange sensation. Being told this, I felt I had no choice but to quit. I wanted to continue a bit longer, but I decided to resign, considering it was my beloved husband's request. Life as a housewife, starting with our marriage, was harder than I expected. I thought being a housewife meant doing household chores, but it was extremely busy. Taking advantage of me being a housewife, Tony stopped doing any housework. Women's workplace is like the home, right? It's wrong to just rush through work to have your own free time. I couldn't talk back to him when he said this in a stern tone. In the morning, I prepared breakfast and helped him get ready for work, timing it with when he woke up. Until he returned at night, I finished all chores like preparing dinner and cleaning the bathroom. Tony, breakfast's ready. I'll be right there. He sat down at the table, looking around leisurely and sighed deeply. You know I went out for a work-related drink last night, right? Yes, I thought so since you came back late. What about it? If I went out for drinks, shouldn't the breakfast be Eggs Benedict? I'm sorry, I didn't consider that. Then he, tapping his finger on the table, silently glared at me. He was particular and would strongly point out anything that differed even slightly from his preferences. Hey, is this where the vase was supposed to be? A normal vase placed beside the TV stand. I bought it thinking it would add a nice touch to the home since he likes flowers. I haven't decided exactly where to place the vase, but I wonder if something went wrong. The vase? I moved it a bit since it was blocking the TV view. Tony clicked his tongue and glared at me.
With this angle, it blocks the view of the painting from my seat. A masterpiece obscured by flowers. What were you thinking? So selfish to prioritize watching TV.
I didn't mean to. I'm sorry.
Try to understand the feelings of a man who's dealing with such a selfish woman.
He kept blaming me relentlessly. Hearing how inadequate I was, I started to strongly believe I was a terrible person.
Rosetta, you've always lived at home and only worked as a nurse, so you might not understand, but society isn't so kind, you know? Being limited to the medical world like that.
When he said this, I started to feel anxious, wondering if my narrow perspective was causing him discomfort.
You say you're a doctor or nurse, but in the end, you only know a narrow world, don't you?
Yes, I suppose.
I've been working at the same company for 30 years since graduating from college, so I'm good at sensing these things. I'll teach you, so be sure to pay attention.
Honestly, I felt that continuing as a nurse would have been far better. His relentless sarcasm often lasts for 2 to 3 hours. Showing any sign of displeasure means starting all over again with the lectures, so I'm not even allowed to look upset. I focused solely on giving answers that would satisfy him or nodding as if I were listening. While it's possible to ignore Tony's sarcasm, there's another issue that's been bothering me for a while. Brittany, our next-door neighbor. She seems to be a successful influencer, and her voice can be heard every night during her broadcasts. Despite living in a well-insulated condominium, the sound leaks through, indicating she must be playing at a very high volume. I've been troubled by this noise since moving in 13 years ago and have complained 2 or 3 times. Remembering those times still makes me angry. Since those complaints, it seems I've been marked as an enemy in her eyes. Every time we pass each other, she clicks her tongue at me. Although it's a regular occurrence, it's still unpleasant to experience every night.
Don't you know what kind of person the neighbor is?
He looked at me sharply when I asked.
Is there a problem with the neighbor? I hope it's not trouble with them.
No, it's not trouble, but the noise. I was wondering if there's something we could do about it.
I don't think it's a big deal. Just don't confront the neighbor directly, okay?
Saying that, he ended the conversation and drank his beer. I haven't brought it up since. Tony often comes home late at night due to his busy work schedule. I try to wait up for him, but sometimes I fall asleep. One night, I thought I heard Tony's voice and tried to get up, thinking he was home, but I was too sleepy. I needed to get up quickly to avoid making him angry. However, when I got up, I couldn't see him anywhere. Huh? Didn't he come home? I could hear Tony's voice, but where was it coming from? Listening closely. It seemed to be coming from next door. It also sounded like he was talking to someone, but was he talking to Brittany? Why would his voice be coming from Brittany's apartment at 1 a.m.? Feeling uneasy, I decided to use some savings I had hidden away from my working days to hire a detective. I never thought I'd be the one to hire a detective. What the detective found was unexpected. However, I still felt it wasn't the right time to confront Tony with this evidence. As the year-end approached, I had a bad feeling. With the long holiday break around the corner and the unpredictability of what might happen on the last day of work before then, I felt a bit heavy. That year-end, Tony came home a bit early from his last day of work before the long holiday, seemingly in a good mood. He had been drinking and was more relaxed than usual. Lately, he'd been irritable and taking it out on me, so this was a bit of a relief.
Welcome home, Tony.
You're home early today.
Yeah, it's the day before the break, so I had a few drinks with colleagues.
I see. Must have been tiring. Looking at the fridge, he asked for more alcohol.
Hey, I'm not done drinking. Get me something.
It was a good thing that he was in a good mood, but his face was clearly flushed from drinking too much.
Your face is all red. Haven't you drunk a bit much?
Drunk too much?
Are you saying I can't hold my liquor? Alcohol is essential for office workers. I'm not weak to it.
Saying that, he quickly drank the beer he was holding. He doesn't particularly like beer. He used to boast about how well he could drink, but I've had to pick him up from bars countless times. Despite his grand claims about being a corporate drinker, I always end up taking care of him when he's drunk. Man, I've sweated a lot drinking tonight. I'll take a quick shower before bed. Saying this, he took his mobile phone to the bathroom. He never used to bring his mobile phone to the bathroom, but lately, he doesn't let it out of his sight, even there. He even takes it with him to the bathroom, which makes me wonder if there's something he desperately doesn't want seen. Thinking about this, I decided to keep an eye on the situation. From the bathroom where he went, I could hear him talking on the phone. The conversation was too quiet to make out, but I wondered what could be so important to discuss in the bathroom. Then, a loud noise came from the bathroom. Shocked, I rushed there and found Tony, looking pained, curled up in the bathtub. Just as he regained consciousness and tried to get out, he collapsed again, unconscious. I quickly checked his condition. At that moment, someone was furiously banging on the door. The banging was so intense, I thought the door might break. It's a rental, and having someone break the door isn't exactly a laughing matter. And who could it be at such a critical time? Yes, I'm a bit busy right now. When I opened the door, it was Brittany.
Move. Get out of the way.
I couldn't comprehend why she would show up right now. She pushed past me, making a beeline for the bathroom without any hesitation.
Wait! What are you doing? Tony, what's wrong? Tony!
Ignoring my astonishment, she took charge of the situation. She acted as if she were the wife, which was bizarre.
Call an ambulance, quick! How can you be so oblivious?
I couldn't let her continue her reckless behavior. There was only one thing to do. Confront her with reality. I just stood there, looking down on them.
Call an ambulance? And you think you have the right to order me around? What do you mean?
Just what I said. Do you think you, of all people, have the right to give orders to me, his wife? She seemed taken aback by my retort. As if it was unthinkable for me to talk back.
If you're so concerned, why don't you call the ambulance? No, I can't, that's why I'm asking you. Think a little, will you?
Suddenly she got angry and objected. I guess so. She snapped back angrily, obviously because it would be embarrassing for her as the mistress to have stormed into the house in a panic. She's probably afraid of a call revealing the affair. She's flustered to make a call, just staring at Tony lying there. I couldn't help but laugh.
You can't even make a phone call? That's just pathetic.
My words seemed to anger her.
What do you mean, pathetic? Are you mocking our pure love?
Her belief in their pure love, despite being just an affair, was terrifying. Focused solely on themselves, their blindness was almost enviable, but this wasn't the time for that.
If you're really concerned about him, making a call should be easy. You should be able to do it.
I challenged her to make the call, showing her the phone. If she really could, there should be no problem. Furious, she glared at me, her face red with anger. Tony seemed to regain consciousness from our voices. He was unconscious, and even when he woke up, he still seemed to be in a lot of pain. He was still in pain, struggling to speak.
My head hurts like it's splitting. Call an ambulance.
He looked extremely pained, his usual composed expression gone. I remarked.
It must be hard. We really should call an ambulance, shouldn't we? What are you waiting for? Do it now.
Right. Something needs to be done quickly. Ignoring his words, I decided to take action. Leaving him rolling in agony, I silently left the house. I took the waterproof-packed mobile phone that had fallen in the bathroom, so he couldn't call from his phone. Brittany and Tony, now awake, seemed relieved and were leisurely affirming their love for each other. Blind to everything but themselves, they didn't even notice I took the phone. I couldn't deal with this foolish, cheating couple any longer. Seizing the opportunity, I decided to leave the house. I immediately left the house and contacted Brittany's boyfriend, Robert. Robert is Brittany's boyfriend, with whom she has a relationship serious enough to consider marriage. He stays over about half the week, so they're practically cohabitating. I've run into him a few times in the hallway and at the garbage disposal area. He's a doctor working at a nearby hospital. I remembered receiving his business card before.
Good evening. Sorry for calling so late. It seems Brittany is at my place for some reason. Could you come and pick her up?
Is this Rosetta? Long time no see. You're saying Brittany is at your place? What do you mean by that? His voice over the phone sounded confused. Understandably so. Anyone would be surprised by a sudden night call from their girlfriend's neighbor.
I'll explain the details later. Are you at work right now?
No, I've just finished work and am killing time at a restaurant near the workplace. Brittany said she had a stream tonight and asked me to come back late. So, Brittany had been making sure not to let Robert stay at her place. She was casually talking to Tony over the phone while Robert was away.
Can you come as soon as possible?
I'll head over right away. Let's meet at the condominium entrance.
Thank you. I'll join you there.
3 minutes after the call, he arrived at the condo's entrance, and we went to my apartment together. On the way, I briefly explained the situation.
To put it bluntly, it seems Brittany and my husband Tony have been having an affair for many years.
What? What do you mean?
I found out through investigation. They met in a service store 13 years ago and have been involved ever since.
Robert was visibly shocked by my words. 13 years? Since that long ago?
Yes. She moved into the apartment next to ours by chance 2 years ago.
No way. Then what am I? I thought we were going to get married. He was struggling to come to terms with the reality of being cheated on. It would be so understandable, considering his marriage plans.
It seems to be for money. I suspected my husband's infidelity and hired a detective. The investigation results indicated that.
That's unbelievable.
Brittany rushed into our apartment when Tony collapsed in the bath. Apparently, they were talking on the phone even in the bathroom.
He seemed deep in thought but then looked at me. That explains it. No wonder she never lets go of her phone. But you said Tony collapsed. Is he all right?
He's fine, just drank too much.
No danger to his life. After explaining briefly, I led him to my apartment. Entering quietly, they were still engrossed in their melodramatic scene.
I'll fight against the world for you, Tony.
Having such a beautiful woman love me, I'm blessed. This must be a trial from God to reach true love. In the 10 minutes it took me to leave, contact Robert. Within the short time, an epic story seemed to have unfolded. A tragic tale of lovers who can't swear eternal love to each other. I was surprised Tony could spout such cheesy lines. Glancing at Robert beside me, he looked indescribable. Seemingly shaking from the cringeworthy dialogue. Unable to bear it any longer, Robert dropped his bag, alerting them to our presence. What's going on here?
Robert, why are you here?
Strangely, both were naked, which was comical.
Why? That should be my line. You told me not to come home early because of a stream. Was it for this?
Normally mild-mannered Robert raised his voice, and Brittany seemed a bit taken aback.
Well, that's because, the fans and antis are troublesome. I was worried about what would happen if they found out I have a boyfriend.
Brittany looked evasive. I knew Robert only from brief exchanges in the apartment complex. He never seemed like someone who would raise his voice. Indeed, he listened calmly when I explained everything to him earlier, showing his ability to control his emotions. So, for Robert to react this strongly, she must have really crossed a line.
Stop taking people for fools. To think you've been secretly having an affair with the neighbor for 13 years.
She suddenly became defensive, her eyes darting around. I thought maybe I'd marry Robert. Is that bad? She tried to look innocent and appealing, but it only backfired with Robert.
We were cohabitating because we talked about marriage someday, but now I just can't believe you.
Brittany, realizing Robert was genuinely angry, quickly switched tactics.
No, this is a misunderstanding. I was just teaching him about streaming, like personal training for the digital age.
Brittany seemed to think we knew nothing about influencers or video streaming, and was clearly trying to bluff her way through. Despite her desperate attempts to wriggle out of the situation, Robert wasn't having any of it.
Private lessons, is that it? Have you already forgotten what you yourself said earlier?
I played the cheesy dialogue I had secretly recorded at high volume.
Hey! You recorded this without me knowing? That's a violation of privacy. Delete it now.
Privacy? You have no right to talk about privacy.
I'm filing for divorce.
Tony, clearly not expecting me to initiate a divorce, was panicking.
Divorce? How are you going to live without me? You're living off me, and now you're talking about divorce? Have you lost your mind?
He seemed to think I would break down and beg him. His male superiority mindset was apparent, still in disbelief over the current situation. His absolute confidence baffled me, but it didn't matter anymore.
Say whatever you want. You can only act tough for so long.
Eventually, we got divorced. After the incident, I immediately sought a lawyer who is an expert in divorce and infidelity cases. Presenting the evidence video helped me demand more than the usual alimony. Meanwhile, Brittany's engagement with Robert was called off, and she now lives a secluded life. This is partly because her streaming blew up after the affair scandal. Right after the infidelity news broke, fans analyzed Brittany's posts, exposing her relationship with Tony. The fans' sharp eyes discerned details from subtle reflections and background elements in her posts. The posts and their hints led to the discovery of her affair with him. The scandal affected Tony too. His company received numerous calls, forcing them to acknowledge the situation. He was fired, for his company took the situation seriously. The company must have wanted to get rid of the trouble. I guess so. After all, a high-profile influencer's affair with a married corporate employee from major enterprise was criticized heavily. When the company's stock dipped around the time of the scandal, they couldn't ignore it any longer. Now, he struggles with the public's disdain and rarely goes out, a consequence of his own actions. He's often the subject of online posts, making it risky for him to venture outside. I ran into Brittany once after the turmoil. She appeared as if waiting for me while I shopped at a grocery store near my workplace.
How come you're living comfortably off a big settlement while I suffer? Isn't that unfair?
Her audacity was typical.
There's nothing unfair about it. It's all the result of your actions. I have nothing to say to you. And what's with your high and mighty attitude? Because of you, my engagement was broken off.
She approached me, growing more agitated.
I was so close to marrying a doctor. Just stop it, will you? You've been secretly having an affair while engaged, and yet you're playing the victim. I can't understand your logic. You should mind your behavior. What do you know? You're the one who's the talk of the internet now. If someone sees this, it'll end up online again.
Realizing the risk, Brittany quickly covered herself with her hood and left in a hurry. Since separating from Tony, I've been enjoying my single life. Living at my own pace is wonderful. I've returned to my nursing job, surprisingly recalling much of my previous knowledge. Surprisingly, my body seems to remember, and I am able to do a certain amount of things. Though I once doubted my future, I now live a fulfilling life, forgetting Tony and Brittany as my form of revenge.
Ah! Look, it's the bitch!
My 6-year-old daughter pointed at the woman who had come to our house. Today was the day my son brought his fiancée over. I quickly lowered my daughter's pointing hand and bowed repeatedly to the fiancé, embarrassed by the terrible thing my daughter had said to her. Upon hearing this, my daughter looked up at me with pure curiosity and said,
"But, sis was happy being called a bitch."
My name is Trinity. At 31, I'm living my life juggling work and parenting. You could say I'm a working mom. My husband, Michael, is also 31. A kind and justice-driven man, Michael is a well-respected salesman within his company. He's supportive in both childcare and household chores, always taking the initiative without me having to ask. It's truly a blessing, especially when I come home tired from work. Marrying Michael was the best decision of my life. Every day, I'm grateful for my husband, Michael. Our daughter, Yasmin, is 6 years old. Full of growth and energy, Yasmin's curiosity knows no bounds. Every day she discovers something new and excitedly shouts,
Mom, look!
enjoying her own little world. It's a relief when she can play by herself, especially when I'm tied up with household chores. Reaching my 30s, I've noticed a waning interest in the wider world, making Yasmin's daily joy frankly enviable. With my husband often away on business trips, he's mostly home only on weekends and holidays. Since I often work weekends too, the days when the whole family is together are rare. However, we're a close-knit family, making the most of our time together, whether we're going on trips or playing locally. Our family relationship is very healthy. Occasionally, my mom, who lives nearby, comes over to visit. Yasmin adores my mom, always exclaiming,
Grandma! Grandma!
in excitement. It's heartwarming to see my mom happily respond with a
Yes.
to Yasmin's calls. For me, busy with work, my mom's presence is invaluable. Compared to mom, I've always had a strained relationship with my dad. There's no clear reason, but our personalities just don't mesh. We have different perspectives, and it seems we disagree on everything. You encounter such people at work too, but the best strategy is usually to keep your distance. It seems Dad feels the same way, hardly ever showing up at my house. Even when I introduced Michael, Dad opposed our marriage. His reason being,
Something about him just doesn't sit right. Something about him just doesn't sit right.
such a selfish reason. To oppose the person your daughter has seriously chosen to be with, just because you don't like something about them, is just too selfish. My already poor relationship with Dad only worsened after he opposed our marriage. But I went ahead and married Michael, ignoring my dad's opposition, because it's my life. Maybe out of a sense of guilt, I found myself avoiding Dad after the wedding. I get along well with Michael's parents, my in-laws, who live far away. When we can take long vacations in summer and winter, I take Michael and Yasmin to visit them. Yasmin has been familiar with them since she was little, so she's not shy at all and is very dear to them. I've always been close to my brother Trevor, who is 5 years older. Our attachment to each other might seem a bit unusual to some. We even exchange emails daily. I share updates about Yasmin's growth and family events, while Trevor vents about work. Whenever something about Yasmin troubles me, talking to Trevor usually helps me forget by the next day. That's how important Trevor is to me. Currently, Trevor, who works for a major corporation, is not only kind and stylish but also handsome. It's a wonder why he doesn't have a girlfriend. Though he's popular, he seems uninterested in romance. His lack of interest in love is, ironically, what draws women to him, something Trevor hasn't realized. Despite everything, we've been living a happy life, supported by a loving family. Then one day, I got a phone call.
Hello? Trinity? It's me.
The caller, unusually, was Trevor. Maybe it was just my imagination, but Trevor's voice seemed unusually lively.
I've got a fiancé.
My intuition was right.
No way. Congratulations. That's great, Trevor.
I was as happy for my beloved Trevor as if the good news were my own. A smile naturally spread across my face.
Trevor, you're so cool but never seemed interested in love. You finally met the right person. I'm so happy for you. So, who is she?
When I asked, Trevor said a bit shyly.
She's someone you'd get along with, really kind. I'll introduce her when you come to our parents' house in 3 months.
In 3 months, got it. Let me know when it's closer, and I'll take time off work. And with one more.
Congratulations.
I ended the call with Trevor. Even after hanging up, my excitement didn't fade. My beloved Trevor was getting married. I wondered what his partner was like, hoping we'd get along well. Filled with anticipation, I looked forward to the 3 months until Trevor's visit. Then, one day, on the way back from picking up my daughter Yasmin from the childcare center, she suddenly said,
Mom, I want to have a doggy. A doggy? You mean a dog? What brought this on all of a sudden?
Yasmin likes dogs, but has never said she wanted one. Maybe one of Yasmin's friends at the childcare center got a dog and told her about it.
Because Dad called someone a doggy the other day.
Yasmin gave an answer that I wasn't sure made any sense. Michael called someone a doggy? Would he say something like that? Feeling puzzled, I casually asked Yasmin about it. Did Dad really say that to you? Why would he? But Yasmin seemed to have lost interest in dogs already, now talking to a flower blooming nearby.
Hello, Mr. Flower. Hello, Mr. Flower.
Maybe it's not something to worry about too much. That's what I thought, but even after we got home, took a shower with Yasmin, and ate dinner, the doggy Michael mentioned wouldn't leave my mind. After Michael got home and Yasmin was put to bed, I decided to ask him directly. Hey, this might sound like a weird question, but what's this doggy thing about? Michael seemed momentarily flustered by my question, then said with a bit of panic.
Oh. I went to a pet shop for work recently and saw some puppies. It made me think how nice it would be to have a dog. You know, they say kids grow up kinder with pets around.
So, the doggy Michael mentioned was about a puppy he saw at the pet shop. He must have talked to Yasmin about the puppies.
Oh, so that's what it was. I was curious because it's not like you to talk about wanting a dog.
Hearing the answer directly from Michael, I felt relieved. It's nothing to worry about, you're overthinking it. Michael said with a laugh, so I decided not to dwell on it any further. 3 months had passed since Trevor's marriage announcement, and the day he was coming home finally arrived. Michael had work and said he would come after it was done, so Yasmin and I headed to my parents' house first. Mom, who seemed happy that Trevor was coming, greeted us with,
Trinity, come in, come in.
Smiling more joyously than usual. Unlike with me, Dad, who gets along well with Trevor, was in a good mood for this occasion. Until Trevor and his fiancée arrived, I helped Mom with cooking. We wanted to welcome Trevor and his fiancée with the best celebration possible. Yasmin was playing with Dad. The table was filled with Trevor's favorite dishes and the favorite foods of Trevor's fiancée, which I had asked about beforehand. Looking at the dishes laid out, I felt a bit of unease. It kind of resembles Michael's favorite dishes. But it must be a coincidence. As I was thinking this, the doorbell rang, and Trevor and his fiancée appeared. Michael hadn't finished work yet and wasn't there, but we started the meet and greet with just the family. Trevor's fiancée is apparently named Riley. I could hear Mom from the entrance. Welcome, Riley. Mom greeted them, and the two stepped into the living room where Dad, Yasmin, and I were. At that moment, a voice came from beside me. Not a blessing, but an unexpected remark.
Ah. Look, it's the bitch.
Pointing at Riley, the voice was Yasmin's, who continued pointing while laughing. Riley, with her beautiful face, looked puzzled at Yasmin.
Yasmin. That's rude to our guest.
I scolded her, and Yasmin made a sullen face and said,
Because Dad called her that. And Big Sis looked so happy about it. Why is it okay for Dad to say it, but not me? I was just playing with Dad when Mom wasn't around.
Yasmin's baffling statement had me, Mom, Dad, and Trevor all scratching our heads. Just then, the doorbell rang, and Michael, having finished work, arrived. I went to welcome Michael, who then entered the living room. And that's when things took a sudden turn.
Cheater!
A voice suddenly erupted. Looking towards the source, it was Michael, his face red with anger. Yelling at Trevor's fiancée, Riley.
Why are you here? What's the meaning of this? Is this some kind of harassment?
Michael was uncontrollably furious. His unusual behavior puzzled everyone else. Michael seemed to not even notice me, our parents, or Yasmin. Then, Riley, Trevor's fiancée, started raising her voice. Gone was her gentle demeanor, now replaced by a harsh tone, furrowing her brows.
Why are you here? And why should I be the one blamed? You were the one who came on to me. I was never serious about you.
Riley was infuriated, blood rushing to her head. Although initially shocked, I began to understand the nature of their conversation was about an affair.
You're the one who said you wanted me to come over on holidays. I went out of my way for you, and this is how it ends. Give me back my weekends.
Michael and Riley had been having an affair. And it seems they were using the weekends when I wasn't around for their escapades. They apparently enjoyed treating each other like pets frequently. Yasmin must have seen this. That's why she started talking about Doggy in such a strange way. The reason the prepared food resembled Michael's favorites makes sense now. They must have been dining out together often. All the pieces of unease clicked together in my mind. Realizing the truth, I immediately took Yasmin's hand and left the living room. I couldn't let Yasmin hear any of this. Whatever happens with Michael can be dealt with later, but Yasmin must be protected at all costs. Then Mom appeared and gently placed her hand on me. I'll stay with Yasmin. It was her way of telling me to go back. I nodded and headed back to the living room. Inside, the heated argument between Michael and Riley continued. The conversation revolved mainly around their affair. It was too much for me to bear, feeling dizzy just listening to them.
Wait, just a minute.
Finding a moment to interrupt their exchange was impossible. Their back and forth was intense and unrelenting. After several minutes, their argument finally began to subside. As they became aware of us around them, both crumbled to their knees, faces turning pale. Michael, what is this? Explain yourself. The moment I began to confront Michael, he collapsed backward with a groan.
Enough. You are no longer family or anything to me. Get out now. Don't you dare touch my daughter.
It was Dad who struck Michael.
You too, don't ever come back.
Dad said this to Riley, then, with Riley and Michael unable to move, he pulled them by the arms and threw them out of the front door. And with one last remark, he spat out. You two deserve the worst. In a setting meant for marriage introductions, Michael and Riley were thrown out for their affair being exposed. Afterward, I demanded a divorce and compensation from Michael in court. Ignoring Michael's futile pleas of, let's talk it over, I proceeded with the divorce.
It's too late to talk things over now. If you hadn't done anything in the first place, we wouldn't be in this situation.
That was the last thing I said to Michael. Trevor, of course, called off his engagement with Riley.
We're never going to see each other again. Don't contact me.
Riley, in tears, pleaded with Trevor to reconsider the broken engagement.
Please. I won't see that man again. Just give me one more chance.
But Trevor, like me, dismissed Riley.
People who do such things once will do them again.
He then demanded compensation for the broken engagement from Riley. After the divorce, rumors of Michael's affair quickly spread throughout his company and to his clients, eroding the trust he had slowly built up. He was transferred to a department with no work to do, leading a life devoid of excitement. Riley, having quit her job in anticipation of marrying Trevor, found herself in debt due to the compensation payments. She ended up juggling multiple part-time jobs, working tirelessly every day without a break. Riley's dream of an easy life through marriage to Trevor turned into a nightmare of the exact opposite. Her ideal wedding plans were shattered overnight. It's true what they say, wrongdoing doesn't pay. Having closed the chapter on Michael, I returned home with Yasmin. Mom looked at me, slightly worn out, and asked with concern, "Trinity, are you okay?"
Mom, I'm fine. It's good that Yasmin found out before she got any older. Some of it might stick in her memory, though.
Then, to Dad, who was reading the newspaper in the living room. Dad, who had struck Michael at that moment. I could never have been as decisive.
Dad, thank you for what you did with Michael. You were right. I was swept up in the moment thinking he was the one, but I should have been more discerning in judging people.
When I apologized to Dad, he looked up from his newspaper and said to me, "Trinity, I'm sorry. I should have been more assertive in stopping you. I thought it would make you unhappy, but I didn't have a clear reason. Just not liking someone isn't enough for you to be convinced, right? Maybe I was just convinced that Dad and I didn't get along, that we weren't close. It's not your fault, Dad. I've learned a lot from this experience." Laughing together, Dad and I looked at each other as if to say, what was all that past conflict about? That's just how family relationships are, it seems. Misunderstanding each other for no reason, and before you know it, making up. I hope Yasmin and I can build that kind of relationship from now on. As for Trevor, he was shocked by Riley's affair and insisted he didn't want a girlfriend for a while. I'm done with that kind of pain. To think that the person I was about to marry was having an affair with my sister's husband. After living as a bachelor for some time, nursing his wounds, Trevor finally began to move on from Riley. He eventually married someone from a company he was dealing with. Trevor's new wife, a beautiful and wonderful woman, was truly deserving to walk by his side.
Can I tell Uncle? Really?
My 7-year-old niece said this as she alternated her gaze between my son and my husband. My son is about to turn 3, but he still can't speak. My niece, talking as if she's having a conversation with my son, looked up at my husband with a worried expression.
Uncle, you see.
My name is Melanie. I work at a staffing agency, and my husband, Timothy, works at the same company. Timothy and I met as colleagues at the company, and since we were close in age, we started dating through work consultations and eventually got married. Then, I became pregnant with our son, Hunter, and took maternity leave and parental leave. When Hunter turned 1, we looked for a childcare center to enroll him in, and I went back to work as planned, originally intending to return immediately. While sending our child to the childcare center, I worked to get back into the pace of work, and with Timothy's help, we managed to get through the busy days of work and childcare without any spare time. When we absolutely couldn't manage, or when Hunter got sick and had to leave the childcare center early, Madison, my mother-in-law who lives nearby, would often pick him up from the childcare center or watch over Hunter while I did household chores. We were very grateful, but Madison gradually started suggesting that we should quit the childcare center. In fact, Hunter was relatively advanced compared to children his age. He began walking just after turning 1, and though not yet conversational, he understood our words and could communicate simply. Madison started treating Hunter like a prodigy, insisting he shouldn't be in a public childcare center but rather receive gifted education under her constant care. This suggestion had us worried. While we were indebted to her, we tried to refuse politely by saying Hunter enjoyed the childcare center, which only made Madison furious. She didn't like that I had returned to work while Hunter was still so young and berated us, saying,
"You don't love Hunter. Leaving him in childcare all day is negligent. Unlike you, I would be willing to stay with him all the time and take care of everything. Just hand Hunter over to me."
I was shocked by Madison's accusation of being a bad mother, but I was even more frightened by her treating Hunter as an object to be handed over. After that, we tried not to rely on Madison, and if Timothy wasn't home when she came over, I pretended to be out. However, Madison started taking actions that couldn't be ignored, like picking up Hunter from childcare without our consent or trying to steal our house keys after bringing over sweets and insisting on coming in. Timothy, too, gave up on reasoning with her after seeing her unreasonableness. We decided to move without telling Madison and began looking for a new place in secret. However, finding a new home proved difficult. We thought it would be easy to find a house in a growing city, but with many people moving in, convenient properties sold quickly. While searching for a house behind Madison's back proved difficult, half a year flew by in no time. By then, Madison's interest in Hunter had waned significantly. Actually, even at a year and a half, Hunter still wasn't speaking at all. He used to babble a lot when he was younger, but lately, he's been completely silent except when crying. Taking him to the hospital worriedly, we found nothing abnormal. We were told that language development varies greatly among children and to keep a careful watch, so we went home carrying our worries. Seeing Hunter like this, Madison did a complete turnaround from treating him as a prodigy, declaring,
"Not speaking much just means he's a disabled child. There must be something wrong with Melanie's body, and that's why she gave birth to a strange child. I don't know why Timothy ever married someone like her."
And she labeled it as a disease. Despite the doctor's diagnosis, being told Hunter was sick and that I was abnormal brought me to tears. Madison hadn't been coming to our house recently, but when she did, it was unbearable how she could say such awful things, leaving me completely distraught. Then, Timothy got angrier than I've ever seen, declared we were cutting ties with Madison, and forcefully kicked her out of the house. After blocking Madison's contacts, we began to ignore her completely, even if she came to the house. Knowing Timothy's firm stance, Madison shouted,
"I don't need a wife or grandson with disabilities,"
and never returned to our house again. Since then, we have been living peacefully as a family of 3, and before we knew it, Hunter turned 3, yet he still hadn't spoken a word. Considering it unusual for him not to speak by this point, we were advised at a public health screening to have Hunter examined at a major hospital. When Hunter and I went to the hospital recommended to us, we unexpectedly ran into my sister Yasmin and my niece Rose, who were there for vaccinations. Yasmin and Rose live far away, and because we had been busy, it had been difficult to meet, so we were delighted by this long-awaited reunion. Since Yasmin and Rose hadn't met Hunter since his birth, they greeted him for the first time.
"What's your name?" "Hunter? That's cool. Yes, you're in the rabbit class, aren't you? Rose loves rabbits too."
Despite not having mentioned Hunter's childcare class to Rose, she naturally continued the conversation as if it was obvious. Surprised, I asked Yasmin, and she said that Rose can understand the language of animals and babies, who can't speak. Half in doubt, yet having witnessed it firsthand, I had no choice but to believe. When the 4 of us went to the hospital cafeteria for lunch, Rose said,
"Does Hunter like hamburgers?" "Yes. And he dislikes carrots? But they taste good together with hamburgers. Does Hunter like hamburgers? Yes. And he dislikes carrots? But they taste good together with hamburgers.
Accurately guessing Hunter's likes and dislikes without being told, which left me speechless. Even after seeing the doctor, the reason why Hunter wouldn't speak remained a mystery. There were no issues with his throat or vocal cords. He could cry and laugh, but he wouldn't utter meaningful words like mom or dad. Feeling down about not finding a solution, Timothy came to pick us up from the hospital after his rounds in the evening. Since we were together, we decided to have dinner as a family of 5, moving to a family restaurant near the hospital. While waiting for our order to arrive, Rose looked back and forth between Hunter and Timothy, then stared at Timothy anxiously.
Hunter is asking when he can start talking to Uncle, she said.
Surprised, Timothy looked at me, so I told him about how Rose had correctly guessed things she shouldn't know, like class names and Hunter's likes and dislikes, leaving Timothy to let out a disbelieving sigh.
Hunter really wants to talk to both Uncle and Auntie. But he couldn't because Grandma was always around, and he was afraid of being taken away, Rose conveyed.
The phrase "always around" caught my attention, and I asked Rose for clarification, given that we hadn't been seeing Madison lately. Hunter shook his head and just stared at Rose. Then, as if struck by a brilliant idea, Rose clapped her hands together, smiled joyfully, and reassured Hunter.
Grandma isn't here now, so it's okay to talk.
Hunter looked around uncertainly, then at me and Timothy.
Mom, Dad. Is Grandma really not here?
Hunter's words came out so fluently that Timothy and I were shocked. As Yasmin calmed us down in our near panic, Hunter reached out his arms, asking to be held. Hastily, I lifted him from the child's seat onto my lap, where he grabbed my hands and happily kicked his legs.
When I was a baby, Grandma said she was going to take me home to talk a lot. I didn't talk because I like Dad and Mom's house better.
Hunter had simply chosen not to speak. This must have been around when he was about a year old. Recalling Madison's insistence on gifted education and her wanting to take him home. Furthermore, Hunter expressed his desire to talk to Timothy and me but felt he couldn't.
Because Grandma is always there. Inside Hunter's home, in the car, even at the rabbit class, he said.
I was baffled by how Madison, who didn't live with us, could always be there, even in the car or at the childcare center. Then, remembering the timing of Madison's visits. On days we hadn't told her about hospital visits or when we received notifications about language training, Madison invariably showed up. Whispering my dreadful suspicion to Timothy, he looked at Hunter in dismay. Can you tell where Grandma is in the house? Timothy's soft question led Hunter to list several locations. Hearing his responses, Timothy's face turned red, and he trembled with emotion. Apologizing to Hunter for not noticing, we thanked Yasmin and Rose for their help before rushing home to confirm our bad hunch and take necessary actions. Once home, we asked Hunter again where Madison could be. Pointing with his little hands, Hunter showed us various places. Under the entrance shoe cabinet, behind the living room sofa, on the top shelf of the kitchen cabinet, and when a device was found under the bedroom bed, I felt dizzy.
When Grandma came to pick me up, she left it behind. Grandma has always been in the house.
Hunter explained, indicating that what seemed to be bugging devices had been left throughout our home, making it feel as though Madison was perpetually present. Discovering such devices within our home, similar to those seen on TV, and confirming their nature as surveillance devices available in abundance online was unsettling. Before the police arrived, Madison showed up at our house, having apparently been listening in on us as we searched for the bugs. Timothy couldn't hold back his fury, confronting Madison.
Mom, what do you think you're doing? planting bugs in our house like it's nothing. This is outrageous, creepy, and a serious crime. It's because Timothy ignored my contacts, isn't it? What's so wrong with wanting to know more about one's own family? We're family, after all. There's no need to make such a big fuss about this. More importantly, Hunter can speak. To think he can talk so much at 3, he must be gifted. Just as I thought, a real prodigy. I'll take him and provide him with gifted education, so he can work at a big company in the future. And eventually, he can take care of me in my old age. Now I can rest easy.
Madison showed no remorse for planting the listening devices, dismissing it as nothing significant. Her blatant disregard for Hunter's wishes and her self-centered assertions made us feel sick. Just as we were considering our next steps, the police arrived. After we explained the situation and the police confirmed with Madison herself, who didn't think she had done anything wrong, she readily admitted to planting the devices and was promptly taken into custody. Despite her resistance and insistence on her innocence, revealing the locations of the devices led to her being packed into a police car and taken to the station. Following Madison's confession, a specialist recommended by the police found numerous listening devices in our home and car. The realization that we hadn't noticed such extensive surveillance was embarrassing. The thought of Madison having heard all our conversations made us dizzy. In the end, Madison was arrested for burglary and criminal mischief, showing no signs of remorse for her excessive actions, even though it was her son and Dil's home. Furthermore, during the interrogation, Madison confessed to also planting listening devices at the child care center. Just as Hunter had said, she had bugged the class he attended. She had paid a staff member, who was a friend, to install them. An investigation at the child care center indeed found several devices. The staff member who assisted Madison faced serious legal consequences and disciplinary action. Timothy was deeply affected by his mother's disturbing behavior. But most importantly, for Hunter and me, we decided to move away from this town filled with unpleasant memories as quickly as possible while Madison was preoccupied with police proceedings, seeking a peaceful life. Considering our job situations, we decided to move near Yasmin's family. Upon explaining our circumstances, Yasmin's family was shocked but understanding, offering their sympathy and saying, "You've been through a lot, well done." With Yasmin's family helping with the move, everything went smoothly. Since then, despite it being her first offense, Madison received a prison sentence due to the malicious, cunning nature of her actions, which were premeditated and carried out with clear intent. Despite Madison's full confession, she seemed unable to comprehend why her attempts to learn more about her family were met with such serious consequences, ranting and causing a scene at the police station, claiming,
"Let me out of here! I was just trying to get to know my family better. I've done nothing wrong."
When we were informed by the new residents of our old home about a letter filled with grievances and demands for release that Madison sent, it was a stark reminder of how fortunate we were to have moved to a place beyond her reach, and the thought of what could have happened if Hunter had been taken by her sent shivers down our spine. Now, free from Madison's watchful eyes and with Hunter able to speak without any reservations, our family enjoys brighter and more communicative days together. Hunter's verbal skills are impressively advanced for a 3-year-old, leading us to wonder if he might indeed be what Madison claimed, a gifted child. However, this does not justify Madison's actions, nor does it mean we are willing to forgive her. Living closer to Yasmin's family has enriched our lives with increased interactions, and Yasmin has been a great help with tasks like picking Hunter up from childcare, which Madison used to handle. Our weekends are now filled with joyous outings to amusement parks, zoos, and trips planned together, fostering a close and supportive relationship. Reflecting on the hardships Hunter endured, we are determined to compensate for the past by ensuring he grows up in an environment where he can freely express himself without restraint, committed to never letting him feel suppressed again.
My Emily is the cutest in the venue, isn't she?
Daniel said with a laugh, addressing Emily. Even though I'm right in front of them, this is how they treat me. It seems nothing but a joke to me. Then Emily, seeing me, burst out laughing.
What? Your wife is ugly.
That's it, I can't take it anymore.
I'm calling off the marriage.
I said that straight to Daniel. My name is Addison. I'm turning 29 this year. I've always loved numbers, and now I work in general affairs. I think this job suits my serious nature. Currently, I'm intensely studying for a qualification. The man I was supposed to marry is named Daniel. I met Daniel at a party. I had never been in a relationship with a man before. I lacked confidence and couldn't initiate conversations with men. As my friends began marrying off, I started attending parties in a rush. That's when I got accustomed to parties and met Daniel. My first impression of Daniel was that he was cool and refreshing. When we talked at the party, I enjoyed conversing with him a lot. Daniel, an elite at a major pharmaceutical company, is the same age as me. Even his academic background is impeccable. Yet, he's unpretentious and always brings up fun topics. I mistook his familiarity with women as just an act at first. Eventually, we became a couple. I was surprised that I could become a couple with him. I thought I had used up all my luck and love for being chosen by such a wonderful person. When we became a couple, he smiled at me and said, "I'm so glad you chose me. I'm such a lucky guy." But really, I was the one chosen by him. So I said,
"I'm super happy too. But why did you choose me?"
I asked him. I was genuinely insecure about being a match for someone as great as him. But he just laughed and replied, "I like girls who aren't experienced with guys and seem pure. You're my ideal."
"Then that's great. Looking forward to being with you,"
I said, smiling back at him. After that, he regularly asked me out on dates. On our third date, he confessed, and we started dating. Half a year later, he proposed. I liked him, so I immediately said yes. "That's great. Let's be happy together," he said with a smile. Living for 29 years, I had finally grasped happiness. I would become even happier after getting married. I believed so. But my expectations crumbled to nothing. Because after we got engaged and started living together, he changed. While dating, "Addison, you're really cute. My princess." He always praised me with a smile. But now, that's a thing of the past. Lately, he's always belittling me. For instance, the day after we started living together. I got up earlier than him that day and started preparing breakfast. I planned to do my makeup before leaving for work, so I was cooking without it. When breakfast was ready and set on the table, he woke up. I called out to him with a smile.
"Good morning, Daniel. Breakfast is ready, let's eat together."
Then he, seeing me, yelled in surprise.
"What an awful face you have. A woman without makeup in the morning isn't a woman. At least make yourself presentable,"
he shouted, furrowing his brow. His eyes were like those looking at something filthy. In a panic, I retorted, "I was going to do my makeup later. Isn't that too harsh? You used to call me cute before we got engaged." I was shocked by his words. But he just laughed and added insult to injury.
"It was just flattery to get married. Honestly, any woman with a decent income who'd do as I say would have been fine,"
he said, laughing. I was so shocked that I dropped my fork. At that point, I wondered if I should really marry him, but we had already paid a deposit for the wedding venue. Besides, there was no guarantee of finding another partner if I let him go. I had no romantic prospects before meeting him. And maybe, just maybe, he might return to his kinder self. Holding on to that faint hope, I had no choice but to endure his harsh words. His behavior and words became increasingly unbearable, especially concerning finances. He stopped contributing to our previously split living expenses.
Could you please contribute to the living expenses? It's tough for me to cover everything with my salary alone.
I pleaded with him on a day off, but he half-heartedly dismissed me.
The wedding costs a lot, right? I'm broke from that expense, so you could at least pay the living expenses.
However, he wasn't bearing the full cost of the wedding. There would be gift money, and his share of expenses should be less. No matter how I tried to convince him, he wouldn't listen. Moreover, he never helped with wedding preparations, even when I discussed the dress fittings. Even when I consulted about a dress meeting.
Why do I care about a dress? It's a woman's thing, right? You just decide whatever.
That's how he responded. And there were issues with his friends too. He seemed to have many friends, as his mobile phone frequently rang. Often, calls were from women I didn't know. When I questioned him, suspecting infidelity.
They're just friends. Jealousy is unattractive.
He dismissed it entirely. Unable to ask more, I was left in the dark until one night I overheard something shocking. It was when I woke up in the middle of the night. I usually slept with him in the bedroom, but that night, thirsty and awake, I noticed he wasn't there. I heard voices from the living room. He was on the phone.
Daniel?
I was about to open the door to the living room, but his words stopped me. Our apartment walls are thin, so conversations are usually audible.
I wished I had married Emily,
he said, laughing. And Emily's voice, loud enough through the phone, responded.
But you'll quit your job someday, right? I want someone who can really provide.
She laughed. Her voice was unbearably annoying. It was clear she was flirting with Daniel and aware of his attraction. But Daniel continued the call unfazed.
It was really great when I was dating you.
You're so cute.
Should we get back together?
Emily burst into laughter at his suggestion.
That would be sad for your fiancé, wouldn't it? Though I'm definitely cuter.
She laughed. Daniel continued to badmouth me with ease. I shed a tear at his cruelty and whispered quietly, so as not to be heard in the next room.
Daniel, you never really loved me. I thought I could finally be happy.
I cried, stifling my voice so he wouldn't notice. Unaware of me, they continued their sweet conversation. Their phone call was hellish for me to overhear.
Why did I rush into this marriage?
I muttered, crying. He was definitely cheating, and it seemed unlikely he'd return to the kind man he was before we lived together. But the wedding was only a week away.
What should I do?
I could only despair about the future. Then came the wedding day. Daniel and I were preparing in the dressing room. Our families had already entered the ceremony hall, leaving us alone. Just waiting for the attendant to arrive, we heard a knock.
Come in, please.
I invited them in, thinking it was the attendant. However, the person who entered the dressing room wasn't the attendant, but a woman in a pink dress.
Excuse me.
I froze at that familiar voice. It was the woman on the phone with Daniel that night. I instinctively knew it. As I stood there, stunned, Daniel spoke in an excited tone.
Ah, if it isn't Emily. You made it here without getting lost,
he said, patting Emily's head. I was baffled by his words and actions, and she looked at him and happily responded.
Daniel gave me the room number. But is this woman your marriage partner?
She laughed, looking at me.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, really?
Such a plain dress for the main character of the day.
It's quite dull. She critically eyed my dress from top to bottom, irritated by her assertive words.
I replied, "This is the dressing room. The attendant will be here soon, so could you please leave now?"
I said to her in a stern tone. Then she quickly hid behind Daniel.
No way, jealousy? This woman is glaring at me, it's really scary. Daniel, help me.
She feigned fear. Addison, jealousy is unbecoming. She's an important person to me, don't be mean. He admonished me. He couldn't see her face behind his back, but she was smirking at me. Her flashy makeup and perfectly styled hair were apparent. She was probably around the same age as me. She spoke with a triumphant look at me.
Daniel really should have married me instead. You'll get bored of such a plain woman in 3 days, won't you?
She laughed. Indeed. I wouldn't choose a woman like this unless she had a decent income. She's not my type, he said, looking down on me. I remained silent on purpose. I thought I'd let them talk as they pleased for a bit longer. I clenched the hem of my dress.
I really wanted to marry you. Even if we can't be a real couple, you will always be the wife of my heart. Daniel, even if you're married, we'll always be together, right? Such an ugly woman is just for the money.
She laughed brightly.
That's right. We'll always be together. I'll quit my job and live off Addison's money with you.
He made an outrageous proposal to her. At that moment, I was on the verge of exploding. What did these two think of me? But they were oblivious to my anger.
Daniel, you're terrible to your wife. Are you proposing that because I'm cuter?
She asked him with upturned eyes. He nodded as if it were obvious.
My Emily is the cutest in the venue, right? What do you think of Addison's face, Emily?
Daniel asked with a sarcastic smile, turning to Emily. Despite my presence, this was how they treated me. It seemed nothing but a joke to me. Then Emily, seeing me, burst out laughing.
What? Your wife is ugly.
And she continued.
Poor Daniel, marrying such an ugly woman. I'll soothe you as your heart's wife,
she said, looking down on me with a laugh.
That's right, isn't it?
Daniel laughed too. That's it, I can't take it anymore. I'm calling off the marriage. I said that straight to Daniel. He, not taking me seriously.
Really? If you cancel the marriage with me, you'll stay single forever. Because you're an unfixable ugly woman.
He started laughing. Emily too.
Daniel, you're too honest. I'm laughing so hard, my stomach hurts.
She clutched her stomach, laughing uproariously. After laughing, Daniel said,
A woman like you should be grateful to get married. You'll support me with your money for life.
I felt a deep rage boiling inside me. Frustrated at myself for not seeing through such a person before the wedding. I clenched my fists, trying to endure. Emily, still laughing.
Well, the wedding ceremony is about to start, right? I have to go eat my share of the celebration money, so I'll head to the venue first,
she said and left the room. Shortly after, the attendant arrived. Seemingly unaware of the conversation in the dressing room, the attendant began preparations, congratulating us. Then the attendant started explaining the wedding. Daniel and I had chosen a restaurant wedding, starting with the reception. According to the attendant, we just had to follow the MC's lead. I listened quietly to the attendant's explanation. Daniel spoke to me nonchalantly.
Once the wedding is over and we're officially married, we'll be husband and wife. Your looks are a letdown, but I'll put up with it. After all, I have Emily.
I ignored his comment. I had no intention of listening to him anymore. I was done with this man. Daniel persisted.
Hey! Answer me.
But I continued to ignore him. All that was left was to exact revenge and denounce him and his actions. I felt a sense of mission burning within me. Then Daniel and I entered the wedding venue. The unsuspecting attendees gave us a generous round of applause. Of course, among them was Emily, smirking unpleasantly. We sat down, and the MC proceeded with the ceremony.
Let's start with the vows. First, the groom, Daniel.
Amidst thunderous applause, Daniel began speaking.
I am overjoyed to marry Addison. I vow to love only her for the rest of my life.
He looked at me with a smug face. All lies. Inside, I looked at him with a cold detachment. Amidst the applause, the MC continued.
Thank you. Now, a response from the bride, Addison, please.
I ignored the MC and remained silent. A murmur started spreading through the venue. My parents and friends looked worried.
Addison? Could we have your response, please?
The MC tried to proceed, albeit confused. Still, I remained silent. The venue became more unsettled. Everyone looked at me with concern. Impatient.
Addison, why are you silent? Just say something.
Daniel harshly said. But I kept quiet. The atmosphere in the venue turned decidedly strange. The in-laws looked at me with puzzled expressions. Enough was enough. I had gathered enough attention. I thought so and opened my mouth. Glancing sideways, I saw Daniel relieved that I was finally going to speak. I confirmed his face and momentarily smirked. It was too early for him to feel relieved. Then I began speaking.
I will not vow to love Daniel. I'm breaking up with him right now. What?
Daniel was stunned, and I casually played the voice recorder at maximum volume. Daniel and Emily's conversation filled the room.
I really wanted to marry Emily. Even if we can't be a real couple, Emily is the wife of my heart. Daniel, we'll always be together even if you're married, right? Such an ugly woman is just for the money.
The conversation from the dressing room earlier echoed through the venue. Previously, when Daniel was on the phone with Emily at night, I felt frustrated for not having proof of infidelity. So, I bought a voice recorder. I always carried it with me, and fortunately, I managed to record their conversation today. The crowd became even more agitated. My friends looked at Daniel with suspicion. My dad seemed ready to get up and punch Daniel, held back only by my mom. My mother-in-law looked like she might faint, and father-in-law John hurriedly supported her. Emily, sitting at a table with friends, was being glared at by those around her. She was sweating profusely and looked extremely uncomfortable. Meanwhile, the recording continued to play. In this chaotic situation, Daniel, confused, shouted,
Addison, what are you doing? Stop that voice recorder right now.
He tried to grab the recorder from me, but I swiftly dodged him. Then I shouted loudly,
There's no way I'll stop it. Everyone needs to know that Daniel is cheating with Emily over there.
I glared at Daniel. Unable to hold back anymore, Emily shouted from her table,
You're so sneaky. Just because you get to be Daniel's wife. The one Daniel truly cares about is cute me.
However, Emily's outburst caused the venue to buzz with a different energy, whispering among themselves. Everyone, regardless of age or gender. Seeing this, Emily began to panic.
What's going on, everyone? What's the matter?
I calmly told her.
Emily, sorry to interrupt your confident speech, but I think you're the ugliest person in this venue.
Someone laughed out loud. Immediately, her face turned bright red.
What? What are you talking about? Daniel told me I'm the cutest, you know? Maybe you're the one with bad eyesight?
She retorted sharply at me. Laughter began to leak from the audience. Emily and Daniel started to look confused. Then one of Daniel's friends burst out laughing and shouted,
Daniel, you've got terrible taste in women. Liking a girl with a face like a panda. And her body's like a panda too.
Following this comment from Daniel's friend, the whole venue erupted into laughter.
What? Aren't you being rude?
Emily yelled at Daniel's friend, but her voice was drowned out by the laughter. Yes, she did look like a panda. First, her makeup heavily lined around the eyes. With her small eyes, she really resembled a panda. And her body was full-figured, making her pink dress seem tight. Her upper arms jiggled violently with every movement. I was worried her pink dress might rip at any moment. The moment I saw her in the dressing room, I realized Daniel's taste was too peculiar. It made sense why he would call me ugly. I borrowed a microphone from the MC.
She called me ugly in the dressing room, but I wasn't upset at all. After all, she is a panda. It's amusing to be insulted by a zoo animal, isn't it?
As I spoke clearly, laughter erupted from various parts of the venue. Her face turned beet red with frustration.
So frustrating.
She stamped her feet in anger. Daniel glared at me. I sighed heavily at the two of them.
People who cheat have no right to glare at me.
Daniel and Emily remained silent, hit by the truth. Then I addressed the silent couple.
I'll be sure to collect the engagement breakup fee from both of you.
They immediately became defensive upon hearing about the fee.
Why should we pay a breakup fee when we aren't even registered as married? I absolutely won't pay. I won't either. I'm a freelancer. I don't have that kind of money.
Emily exclaimed. The crowd looked on in disbelief at their comments. Some even chuckled at their ridiculousness. Then a person stood up and approached us.
Daniel, enough is enough.
Daniel's boss, with a red face, yelled.
Boss! This is,
Daniel, looking perplexed, tried to make an excuse to his boss. But he seemed at a loss for words and remained confused. The boss sighed heavily at his demeanor.
What an irreparable thing you've done. Cheating openly in front of Addison. Maybe it's my fault for not educating you properly.
The boss said, holding his head. His face turning pale. He seemed to be trembling slightly. Emily, looking puzzled, said,
That ugly woman is from a different company than Daniel, right? Why is Daniel's boss so worried about it?
She asked, tilting her head. Sensing something off from the boss's reaction, Daniel asked, Boss, what's wrong? My engagement breakup with Addison has nothing to do with you, right? He asked nonchalantly. Then the boss, face red with anger, shouted,
Don't you know our company's board of directors? Don't you recognize Addison's dad?
He yelled desperately. Daniel looked back and forth between the boss and my dad.
No way!
He muttered. His face turned pale. My dad's face was red with rage, veins popping.
I am a director at your company. Your future will be discussed at the board meeting.
Daniel was shocked. He tried to appease my dad in a panic.
Wait, please. It's too much for this incident to lead to that.
Daniel's friends were also surprised. They were all his colleagues, so bewildered by this turn of events. It's natural to be confused when the bride's dad is a director at your own company. Then my dad said calmly,
Weren't you planning to quit the company and live off my daughter? You just played it on the voice recorder. If you're so eager to leave the company, why don't you do it now?
That's... Daniel's face was filled with despair. And with Dad's words, Daniel's mother finally fainted. His father, John, was frantically calling her name. For her, Daniel was probably the pride and joy of the family. A well-educated graduate working in a major corporation. He must have been on a seemingly perfect elite path. But now, this incident not only derailed his elite trajectory but also cast his future into uncertainty. I had only met the in-laws once at a greeting. But they seemed like very nice and sensible people. That's why this incident must have been incredibly hard for her to accept. Daniel looked terribly bewildered by his mother fainting. And then, incredibly, Daniel yelled at me.
If you had told me your dad was a director at our company, I would have treated you better.
He accused me, completely disregarding his own actions. He seems to be pretending that nothing happened to him. That was the last straw for me. Daniel blaming me in such a situation. I didn't care what happened to him anymore. I asked Daniel with a smile.
Treat me better? Like contributing to our living expenses during cohabitation? Or not contributing money but at least staying out of housework? That's...
He faltered. I exposed to everyone that Daniel didn't contribute to living expenses and yet interfered in household matters. Daniel was now subjected to even more disdainful looks from the crowd. Especially the women there didn't seem to see him as a human anymore. Maybe they thought even a weed would be better than him. Even Emily said to him,
"Daniel, you didn't pay any living expenses at all? That's really bad, isn't it?"
He, realizing the gravity of the situation, turned even paler. I smiled at him. "Good for you, Daniel.
You wanted to quit your job, right? You'll probably be able to quit very soon."
He looked around. Dad, glaring at him in rage. Friends looking at him with disdain. Emily, a bit in disbelief. Not a single person was on his side. In such a situation, most people couldn't stand it. Then he began to tremble and clung to me.
"Addison, I was wrong. Please don't call off the engagement. I don't want to quit my job."
He apologized profusely. Sweat on his forehead. It was too late for apologies. I looked at him with cold eyes. "It's over, Daniel.
After being looked down upon like this, there's no going back. Just stop it." "But..."
He looked like he was about to cry. I added the final blow.
"Freelancer Emily and soon-to-be unemployed Daniel, a perfect match."
Emily turned pale as well. If she were burdened with an unemployed Daniel, they would both be in trouble. Quickly, Emily distanced herself from Daniel. And then, Daniel collapsed, his knees giving way.
"Don't ever show up in front of me again."
I left the two of them behind and exited the venue in my wedding dress. Eventually, he left the company. The company's decision was a demotion in the guise of a department transfer. A department where his main job was sorting documents. However, many company associates had witnessed his debacle at the wedding. Leading them was our dad, a director of the company. The smart ones started keeping their distance from Daniel, and it seems he was secretly condemned by many. Consequently, he found it increasingly difficult to stay at the company. Eventually, unable to bear it, he submitted his resignation before the transfer. But leaving the company brought him further trials. It was the hefty breakup fee. The engagement breakup fee was just the going rate, not too high. But we added the wedding costs on top of it. Since the wedding turned out that way, we had to return the congratulatory money to all the guests. But the food was served, and the full cost of the wedding had to be paid. He was responsible for the disruption of the wedding, so it was decided that he would bear the cost. Daniel's parents, who were very nice people, apologized to me several times. I felt almost sorry for them. Daniel had no savings. He was flashy with money and spent whatever he had. Therefore, his parents initially shouldered the guarantee money. However, in the discussion,
"If I marry Addison, I don't have to pay, right? Then I'll register the marriage,"
Daniel argued. I felt nothing but contempt for him. And for saying that, he was severely scolded by his father, John. Eventually, an infuriated John said, "You're hopeless. I'm done with you." Daniel was visibly panicked. With no job and no home, Daniel was in a dire situation. Naturally, the apartment where Daniel and I had been living was already in the process of being vacated. I think he has to leave by the end of this month. I had already arranged movers and sent my belongings to my parents' house, leaving the apartment. After that, he kept ignoring the landlord's eviction notices. Eventually, he was sued. I found out about this because the landlord contacted me. Apparently, he had stayed there for about 3 months without paying rent. He was forcibly evicted through legal proceedings. It's unlikely that he who now disowned by his parents could return to his parents' home. Jobless and homeless, his future looked bleak. I think he has hit rock bottom. And he hasn't rebuilt anything with Emily. Through a lawyer, I demanded the guarantee money from her. I offered a condition: if she didn't reconcile with Daniel, the fee would be reduced. Without hesitation, she chose not to reconcile. "I'm not interested in someone without money or a home," she declared firmly. Apparently, Daniel reached out to her several times for help, but she ignored all his attempts. She apologized to me. "I'm really sorry," Since that wedding, everyone calls me a panda. It's been tough. I think the guests spread the word. She seemed to have realized her mistakes and reflected on her actions. But no matter her remorse, she faced constant criticism. Even at her part-time job, the panda nickname got out and she quit, being laughed at behind her back.
I'm thinking of moving far away,
she said. She, forced to flee due to her careless comments with Daniel. She will likely continue to be cautious about public scrutiny. A fitting punishment for her disdainful behavior. I hope she learns from this. As for me, I passed my certification exam. The qualification is for a social insurance labor consultant. Working in general affairs, dealing with payroll and entry/exit procedures, I wanted to be more knowledgeable about labor management. This will surely motivate me more in my work. Not just in work, but I've also taken a step forward in romance. After the wedding, my friends started introducing me to men, knowing I was done with parties. I was grateful for their kindness. There's one man, introduced by a friend, with whom I've become close. He's 3 years older, hardworking, and not very handsome. Rather plain-looking. He works office administration in a small to medium enterprise, nothing glamorous. After Daniel, elite and good-looking men trigger a rejection in me. So, this man feels like someone I can be myself with. It's still early to tell how it will go. But it's a step forward. I want to cherish this one step forward for the future.